2024. This may be the last election. Everybody knows the meme. Tim Pool, and it's the guy with the butterfly, and he says, "Is this civil war?" Because that's me. We talk about it quite a bit. But I do think, while funny as it is, and I love to roll with the punches, it's entirely fair. I didn't just one day come up with this concept. There have been many much smarter individuals than I who have argued we may be facing another civil war, especially with what we're seeing now politically with legal disputes, legal challenges, and this bifurcated culture in the United States. Yeah, maybe. And this may be the last election. Don't take my word for it. Ask Roseanne Barr. Because she came on this show and she said she doesn't think she said there will not be another election. The argument made was, are you saying that they'll quite literally just have no ballots, no voting? No, not necessarily. It could be that we get a North Korea style election where no one just believes it's actually happening. But I wonder. So joining us this morning on The Culture War is the author of two books. We have Stephen Marche. He's recently written, I think with Andrew Yang, The Last Election, as well as your other book was The Next Civil War.
That's right, yeah.
And then Phil Labonte is joining as well.
Hello, everyone.
To help us have a fresh perspective on this, because I'm the Civil War guy. I'm always talking about it. We have talked before.
Me too.
Right, yeah. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I mean, I'm Stephen Marche. I'm a Canadian writer who wrote a couple of books about what I saw as the crisis facing American politics, and I'm really happy to be here.
I am Phil Labonte, lead singer of All That Remains, very failed musician, anti-communist, and counter-revolutionary. Let's go.
That's a better title than mine.
He's got
for
practice.
sure. Yeah, he knows how to do this.
I've been doing
So we talked a long time ago, actually, about your previous book, The Next Civil War.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really great conversation. I think we disagree on a wide range of things, but I think we agree on like basically everything in your book, like what's causing this, where it might end up. And then I saw that you and Andrew Yang put out another book, The Last Election.
Right.
And we got to talk about it. So are you saying that 2024 may be our last election in the United States?
Yeah. I mean, that Andrew came to me and wanted to talk about this because he's extremely worried about the electoral system, right? And its vulnerabilities, the particular vulnerabilities of the American electoral system and its constitution, and along with all the other stuff that we talked about. When I wrote The Next Civil War, like I was very consciously trying to write stuff that I only felt certain of, which is very hard to do in the American context because everything gets caught up in, flame wars and so on. And I only wanted to write about things that I know. And that's why I never ended up writing a chapter on electoral politics, right? Because everyone you talk to, you're just trying to triangulate opinions, and everyone has an agenda, and you don't actually know how things work. And Andrew came along and said, like, why don't I explain to you how American politics actually works, and we'll put it in a thriller. And to his credit, I asked him for two things. I said, if I call, you have to return my call. Like, I know you're important and you're out fundraising and stuff like that, but I need the information quickly. And also I want you and your whole staff and everyone to tell me the actual truth. And that way I figured, whatever happened, I would at least know how American politics works.
So the previous book, The Next Civil War, this is more of like an essay, a description of what's going on and things you've seen. And The Last Election, the book now, is actually more, it's a novel, but it's kind of predictive. Is that it?
Well, I would describe it as a paranoid political thriller, but accurate. Yeah. Right, where what we wanted to write was the most accurate political thriller that's ever been written. So we just got the absolute sort of core, like even boring details about the mechanics of how an election works, how and these systems that people are always shocked when things fall apart. But there's if you know why things work and how they work, it comes as no surprise, right?
So you've got so again, this is a fictional depiction based on all of these things you've seen and what's currently going on and what you like. It's kind of like what you feel could happen. Yeah,
I mean, there's kind of two aspects to it. So one is like the campaign stuff. So that was like, I asked Andrew, what are the three most important dates in a political campaign? Like, I'm trying to plot a novel here. Like, what are the dates? And he was like, first campaign fundraising report, second campaign fundraising report, third campaign fundraising report, right? And you realize talking to him, one guy I talked to was a humanization coach who is this is a literal human being who's an ex-Broadway actor who goes around the country teaching politicians how to talk like a human being. right? Like, and he does some things like
I am not surprised that
And he does
exists.
things like say something and then put a piece of Lego on another piece of Lego, or I'll ask you a question and then I'll throw you a wiffle ball and you catch the wiffle ball. And they do all these and this man does
Is it
not
because
lack
they're
for
lizards?
work. No, the reason is that because their job is fundraising.
Yeah.
So what they do is they go into rooms and they give the same spiel 70,000 times, and by the time they've given it the 35,000th time that they're asked the same question and they give an answer, they naturally, like, it's not really their fault, right? Yeah. It's just that they tune out, right? And so it was him and like, I talked to a real live opposition researcher, and I mean, you talk to one of these guys for 5 minutes, you think you realize like everything I wrote in The Next Civil War, not an optimistic book, but like 5 minutes talking to this guy, I was like, oh, it's way worse than I thought. I mean, it's way worse. Like talking to the Oppo researcher, they kept saying like, I'm trying to plot a book. So it's like, okay, when do you release the scandals on this guy? And they kept saying, well, like, we unload the book here, and then it's like, well, you wait for their fundraising report come out, and then you unload the book on them then. And then after a while, I was like, hold on a minute. When you say unload the book, is there a book? And he's like, oh yeah, there's a book written on every American politician. And I was like, can I see one? And he's like, well, they're illegal to own, but I'll put one up on Google Docs and you can pull it down.
They're illegal to own?
Yeah, well, it's libel, right? Like it's, I mean.
So it's civil tort. They're all defamatory.
I mean, it's defamatory, right? Yeah. So I see one like of this random politician, and it's everyone they've ever sat down next to a party that said something horrible.
Wow.
It's everyone. It's every financial transaction they've ever been involved in. It's every tweet that could be construed a certain way. It's also there was a part where it was like, this guy dated a female bodybuilder in high school. Can we do anything with that?
Wow.
Right? Like everything that they could smear a guy with. And I was like, who in their right, what sensible, decent human being? Like, what would the book look like on me?
Yeah.
Right? Like on anyone, on all of us here in this room, right? Like, I mean, who in their right mind would do it?
And it's not just that, it's really easy to take things out of their contemporary context.
Oh, being a human being.
Right,
doing flawed things, making errors.
I'll give you an example of in 2016 there was a story in the New York Times, and it was considered to be highly dubious. And Dave Rubin gave his thoughts on the story. I can't remember exactly what it was. Mm-hmm. There's a video of me where I said, "Look, if you give me the New York Times or Dave Rubin, I'm going to trust Dave Rubin." Okay, right. And then what happens now is people will take that clip and be like, "Tim Pool thinks Dave Rubin is more credible than the New York Times," when I was making a specific reference to a single story. That's the kind of thing that can appear in books like this.
Oh, that would be one.
The opposition research.
Yeah, it would be like that, except it would be 7,000 of them.
And 7,000 times worse.
Yeah, and well, also much more dubious.
Right.
Like much more like, well, this is like, it probably is meaningless, but we could do this. So when I talk to, and the opposition researchers are like the most boring human beings you ever met in your life, like bank managers.
Yeah.
Right, and it's like, this is their job. This is what they do.
Have you ever seen Sherlock Holmes? What is it, Game of Shadows with Robert Downey Jr.?
I tried 15 minutes and I was like,
oh, you didn't like it?
As a Sherlock Holmes fan, I was like, this is the lowest form of Sherlock Holmes that's ever existed.
However, I do like in the story where, to use my pop culture references, that he finds the semi-automatic pistols. It's like turn of the century, 1900s.
Right.
And it's Moriarty basically saying war on an industrial level is coming and I'm going to own it. Right. And it was this interesting idea that the idea they're giving you is that for all of us right now, we understand industrialized warfare with machine guns and air raids. But before the Industrial Revolution, it was much more difficult to make weapons. For instance, I was researching about Civil War weaponry.
Right.
And the advances in rifle technology they're like 50 years apart. It's like they use smooth bore muskets for hundreds of years.
Right.
And then once we got to the industrial level, it's just all of a sudden everyone's got a semi-auto. It's crazy. What you're describing with opposition research today seems like the industrialization of politics, of political lawfare, where it used to be that there was a scandal on somebody, they'd bring it up. Now it's every politician has a book.
Yeah.
They're gonna make up anything they have to, and everyone is in a heightened sense of like rabbit level, exhilaration and fear.
Well, I would say it's partly that, but also the thing that I was amazed by, it's funny, because of course when you say it out loud, it's totally obvious. It's politics is about money. Like I knew that, we all knew that. I just had no idea that it was 12 hours of a politician's day. Yeah. Right? Like that is the job. right?
so-
It is gaining attention in order to get money in order to gain attention, right? Like, so it's partly the celebrification of this stuff and the mimetic warfare aspects of it. But like, what they do all day is fundraise. That's what they are.
Do you think that's why Trump was such a unique political figure? No, and that's not trying to have a positive or negative cast on it, but do you think that he was different and in a way that, or a different type of politician because of the fact that he, not that I know that he did or did not have a book, but do you think that like they were scrambling? We got to come up with this with the Oppo research now when he came down the elevator.
Oh, well,
because he'd teased it for so long.
There's so much Oppo research.
I'm not saying that there's.
No, but
I'm not saying that it's not, but it's not correlated together.
So
the
when
way
you
that we're
talk to
talking
an
about.
opera researcher, I brought this up. I was like, "What's the point of Scandal anymore?" Like, you know, like there was a time I remember. I'm old enough to remember it, where George H.W. Bush, checking his watch, dominated a news cycle for 3-4 days.
Biden, same thing happened with Biden when the troops came back.
Obama wearing a tan suit. That was like a news cycle. So
You know, it wasn't a news cycle when Obama killed that kid, Abdulrahman al-Awlaki.
Anyway, it was not.
So Trump,
scandal free.
So like opposition research very clearly, and they speak of it just this way, is like you are not looking for the bad things that they did. What you are looking for is the good parts of them that you then sour. Right. So like there's a, gosh, I can't remember it, but you're not looking for bad things.
Yeah.
You're looking for the best part of people and suddenly to make it seem garbage. So it's partly swift boating, but actually what you're doing is you're going into their base and just skewing it.
For people that don't know what swift boating is, it was looking at something that John Kerry had done. He was talking about something for Vietnam vets, I believe, and which was ostensibly a good thing, and they turned it around and made it seem like he was against vets, against everybody.
Yeah, he was a Vietnam vet. George W. Bush was not a deserter, but like got out of it, and they managed to turn that. That is opposition research. So with the case of Trump, there's nothing to sour, right? Like, there's no point you really like what they actually should have done from an opposition research point of view is made fun of his hair, made fun of his virility, made made fun of his money, more like the fakeness of the money, right? Like that, but they couldn't quite bring themselves to do it. But Trump is invulnerable to the kind of opposition research that other politicians are absolutely vulnerable.
So you need innovations then.
Well, he's totally innovative. I mean, you know, like in so many, I mean, it's kind of funny because it's like, is he an innovator or did he just react to a changing world? Right. You could say it either way. Like, I think I would be fine with either way. But basically, he understood that politics had become celebrity before anyone else.
He's WWE.
Yeah.
You like he's in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
You want to get in the ring with
is.
this guy who knows how to hit someone in the back with a folding chair, and you've never experienced that. He's gonna roast you.
He literally is the heel turn.
Yeah.
Right. From WWE. Like that. I mean, that is the basis of his politics. Right.
It's amazing.
And I mean, it's hugely effective. I mean, it was one of the really depressing things talking to Andrew was like, we're figuring out like who could run. And Andrew was just like, look, they have to be celebrities and billionaires. Those are the only people who have a chance. It's like, and they just skip so many levels.
Right. The skipping fundraising. If you are wealthy and you do not need to make phone calls and make promises, you've jumped the game.
Yeah, and you still would have to do it, but because the fundraising thing I learned is like it's not necessarily even the money; it's that when people give you money, they fight for you.
Right.
Right. So it's like it's that when you get somebody to give you money, they are invested in you, literally. Right. And so that's more part of the political process.
So it's more psychological than actually about the money then.
Well, it's also that you're definitely going to vote. Yeah. I mean, if you gave $250 to somebody, like you're definitely going to go and vote. So it's the same cycle of money and attention, right? Like
without spoiling the book, because I know it's a novel, let's walk through the fact-based points of like what's going to happen next year that could result in this being the last election.
Well, here's the premise of it, like the thing that it moves towards is the process in the Constitution called a contingent election, right?
Oh yeah.
So what happens? This has happened twice before, 1824, and then in a vice presidential candidate in 1828. if no one hits the threshold of 270 electoral college votes, what then happens is that it goes to, and by January 6th, right, for whatever reason, what happens is it goes to the House, and each House has a state delegation that gets one vote for president. So the Republicans would win every time, right? Like, because they just, Wyoming, they have more House. It hasn't. Yeah, there's different numbers on it, but I mean it's overwhelmingly in favor of the Republicans. So this means that by this method, there's also a separate method for picking the vice president through the Senate, which you could have a Republican president and a Democrat vice president, which would be, I mean, hilarious. But you would have so it goes to the House Republican, it goes to the House delegates. They each get a vote. And so you have an election which is constitutional, but which does not reflect either the popular vote or the electoral college vote. Right. And so what you need for that to happen is a third party candidate who takes a significant amount away. RFK, I mean, some of the numbers they're showing are pretty like what's in here. Right. And if that happens, it's quite possible that no one at all would reach 270. If you throw into that election denial and faithless electors, which has happened in American history, you get an election where the point is that it would be constitutional but illegitimate, i.e. exactly like elections that you mentioned in North Korea or East Germany or whatever.
There's been a big conversation around, last night a podcast comes out. Tucker Carlson says he thinks RFK Jr. pulls votes from Trump. However, I think that's probably not correct based on the conversations we've had. And I think there's, like 10 polls and 7 of them show the inverse actually with RFK Jr. Biden actually sinks a little bit more than Trump. But regardless of
it doesn't matter.
Exactly. My point is this. When we talk about that, the one thing left out is all that really matters is RFK Jr. wins maybe one small state or something.
Exactly. Or even gets, like if he's in Maine and he gets some of the electoral college votes there, that could tip it splits. Like, this is a fine game, right? That you guys have been playing with your elections since 2000, right? Like all it takes is like a tiny little flick to really prevent that from happening.
I think Nebraska famously has the split with like the urban and the rural area.
Yes. So I actually myself can't keep track of them. Like I tried for the book. I was like, I'll have a map. And I was like, it's insane. It's this patchwork 18th century system. Keeping track of it, even for someone who's like, I'm going to keep track of it for 3 months. Very hard.
I think most states are winner take all.
Yes, almost all.
Almost all of them.
Yeah.
But if RFK wins even a handful of electors, and then neither Trump nor Biden or whoever, I don't think it's going to be Biden. It's got to be somebody else. But if they don't reach 270, then it goes to the delegations like you explained.
Yeah.
I couldn't find the number, but there are more Republican states than Democrat states, which would result in the Republican candidate winning.
It goes back and forth, but there's just an overwhelming preponderance. The likelihood of it being Republican is much higher.
And so we had Jen Kuger on last week, and I believe he's incorrect in his broader view of this, but the general idea he said was the plan for 2020 was with January 6th, was to disrupt the electoral vote count, which would, and Mike Pence would say, I'm not going to accept these. They got to go back to the state legislatures.
Right.
That would result in a contingent election. If that doesn't happen, then he believed that January 6th's purpose was to disrupt the count entirely so that they would then say, well, it's got to go to a contingent election.
Right.
I don't think there was a plan at least any high level. So I don't agree with Cenk on that.
I don't think they knew what a contingent election was.
Right.
No, not at all.
I mean,
it's right. I think a lot of these people were just, I mean, if you look
they were winging it on a wing and some insane demand that they were like, what the hell are we supposed to do? I mean, that it was,
There's one guy who's going to jail now for like 2 years or whatever. And he's on video being like, we did it. We're in the building. Haha. And it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like,
what is we did it?
In the 1600s, perhaps occupying a building meant you were now in charge, but that doesn't mean anything today.
Yeah.
But if Mike Pence did say, I think it was like even one state, if he said, the state legislature of this state has disputed their election and it is currently in litigation, I will not count these votes, Trump would have won.
Well, I think
it might have been 2 states.
Well, technically, I think it'd be a little harder because the contingent election has to take place on the 6th, right? Like the electoral the college vote had already happened, right? So like like
I see what you're saying, right?
Like the January 6th is just the certification,
Right?
Like they disrupted the certification.
He would have had to have done it prior.
Exactly. So like on January 6th, if he had done that, it wouldn't have made any difference because the certification legally, because the certification has already happened. So if the decertification does not arrive for any reason by January 6th, then it goes into a contingent election. But it has to take place on that date.
Yeah.
Right. The US electoral system is both chaotic and incredibly specific.
Right.
Right. Like, so it's, it's not like they can, in Canada, if something happens like this, you just have another election in 4 weeks and that's it. Right. I mean, but you can't, you have no mechanism for doing that.
An interesting point was brought up. I think it was Ian last night on Timcast IRL said, we don't need to rush elections. And it's like, he's right. Like, if there's an issue, I don't see a problem with being like, okay, hold on, guys. This one's going to take a little bit longer to figure out. Let's just chill and then we'll litigate. Everything here is like, no, it must be this day. It must be done or else.
Particularly national elections.
The U.S. Constitution is a seriously problematic document, right?
The Constitution?
Of course it is.
Intentionally.
Well, right.
Well, I mean, look, it's a work of great genius, but it's a work of 18th century genius. And we're living in the 21st century, and it doesn't. And like, this part of this problem is the edge of it.
Right? The resistance.
Just to be clear, like U.S. Constitution is a work of genius. Like I'm not.
I think you're completely right.
But it's just an antiquity.
The pushback that you are going to get from people that believe in the Constitution or that favor the constitutional system is not so much that there are not things that could be better in the Constitution. It's that if you allow someone to try to change it, they're going to change it in a way that takes power away from the states and centralizes it. And that the whole point of the Constitution is not to centralize power.
But I would say the issue is the Constitution can be amended. And so
Jefferson said, if a constitution lasts longer than 19 years, it's a contract with the dead.
Wow.
Right? He said, like, if you need to change it every 20 years. So like, Canadian Constitution was written in 1982. We could all read it in this room and know exactly what it means.
The argument was because the people that signed the Constitution have passed away. They're no longer in power. So that means that the people that exist now didn't have any say in it. So you can't say that it's a contract with the people, because the people that exist today had never had a say in the Constitution, and there's validity to that argument.
Yeah. You're living with ghosts now, great ghosts, right? Like some of the greatest geniuses that have ever lived, but it's still ghosts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
And like this extremely jalopy of an electoral system. Like this, like patched together, it is very vulnerable. Like
Absolutely.
It could break down. Like I don't know if it's 2024, but I mean, all signs point to like a lot of weakness. It's coming.
I got bad news for you, Stephen. Your book, The Last Election.
Yeah,
you got it wrong. The last election was 2020
or 2000.
Exactly, and that was the point I was going to make. We've had this discussion, and is the last election 2024? Or are we already at the point where with 2020, the dispute, well, hold on, there was also challenges to the 2016 election. Well, hold on, 2000 was determined by the Supreme Court. And I'm a little kid for that. But the point is, at a certain point, I mean, to be fair, you could argue since 1876.
Yes.
A council determined who was going to be president because there was a dispute.
Yeah.
We've long had these disputes, and then the machine gets mechanized. But I think in fairness to what we're actually trying to argue, the contemporary issue, in 2016, Hillary Clinton lost.
Yeah.
Donald Trump wins. And for the next several years, they accused Trump of being a Russian spy or a Russian agent or having colluded in some way with Russia.
Not my president.
Not my president. And it resulted in hobbling the Trump administration in certain ways. He couldn't fire certain people.
They hobbled themselves well enough.
I think it's fair to say.
They didn't fill 1/3 of
two things can be true at the same time.
True.
Exactly.
Two things.
Like, I'm not going to disagree with that, but he was hobbled by, could he fire Comey, and could he change things that a president should normally change? He wasn't able to do it. There were a bunch of other issues too. He was hobbled in a lot of crazy ways. When he tried withdrawing troops from Syria, his advisors, the commanders, lied about the troop presence, lied to the American people. That's insane to me. And so if we're talking about the last election or whether or not we're in a civil war, we need to consider the context from 2016 onward, and probably before, like you mentioned, 2000.
Well,
But
I think the context from like elite institutional forms, like it's so funny coming from another country, because like in every other country in the world, there's a civil service that has the power. Right. And the politicians come and they run the country. The politicians come in, they can change the civil service, but it's like steering a massive ship. Right. And I remember the reason I wrote The Next Civil War, honestly, is because I was in Washington for the 2016 inauguration, and a journalist calls me at like 2 a.m. and says like, hey, come to this party in Georgetown. And I was like, okay. So like I go out to this guy's house, and it was some like low level bureaucrat from FDA. Or Department of Agriculture, like the kind of guy who's like responsible for the price of wheat in 2080. Do you know what I mean? Like plan like analysis
most annoying
of like,
type of bureaucrat.
like the most innocuous.
Well, yeah, and keep us alive. Like very annoying, but keep us alive. And he taken his chair and he had all the presidential pictures, like the big presidential thing. And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "No one came to replace us at the FDA. Like they turned out the lights." At the FDA. That's when I knew, like all the other stuff, like the American Carnage speech, all that stuff, that's when I knew America's in trouble. Like, let's start to think about the deep structures of this, because like you can go without politicians, but without a bureaucracy, without a civil service, you're like things fall apart very quickly. Right. But my point is with the electoral stuff, the problem is that no one believes that a legitimate election has happened. So
from 2016?
From 2016, probably, I think 2016 is really the marker, where it's like they don't actually, like 2000, it's like, well, there was some play and it didn't, like, but on the other hand, it's like, like we understand that sometimes mistakes happen, popular vote, but 2016, people were like, this was illegitimate. I think 2020, the right, I mean, they still believe it's illegitimate.
Considering Barack Obama was clearly the winner in 2008 and 2012, like clearly America was generally like the center and the left were very unified, very, very pro-Obama. So I think that because of that, 2016 is probably the most. It's probably more accurate to say 2016 was when it really fell apart.
So here's the point I wanted to make. 2016 election in dispute. Donald Trump, as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States, wants our presence in Syria reduced.
Yeah.
The people beneath him who are instructed as per our Constitution and the laws of this land lied to him to keep troops in a foreign country and lie to the American public. But that's some kind of coup.
Well,
when
to me, it's perfectly natural that there'd be a tension between an executive and the people following it out. I mean, that just to me is like, that's life. Like certainly that like people, like whoever is the leader of Germany, what he thinks about all day is why won't these people do what I'm telling them to do?
Yes, but the president of the United States is elected by the people to be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and we never declared war in Syria.
Listen, I just think when you're dealing with large-scale institutions, there's just you can call that a coup, but actually what that is just a natural tension between an executive and a bureaucracy.
When Trump, as the commander-in-chief, says, American forces out, and they say, you got it, boss, don't do it.
Not
they have
the military.
defied the direct order of the duly elected president.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that's a hard coup where the military storms in and seizes power.
Right.
That is coup-ish, where elements of the military have begun to defy the civilian government.
The military doesn't have the leeway. No one in the military has the leeway by the book to say we're not going to do what my superior officer said. And the president is the commander in chief.
But this is also the premise of the book, like that there's a military. Like it's not necessarily a coup. It's just that like what happens with the military this happens all the time in countries falling apart. In countries in civil war, is that the only institution that everyone approves of is the military, right? And I mean, in America, that's just extreme now. Yeah, I mean, like no one has any respect for the Supreme Court. Nobody, never mind Congress.
Military's going down.
Well, they're the last one standing in this decline of faith in institutions, decline of faith in the media, decline of faith in the church, right? Decline of faith in local government, decline like. That is the mega trend from the, you were born what, 1980? No.
86.
86. You're almost exactly the point where the decline of faith in institutions begins. Like your whole life has been a decline of faith in institutions.
Yep.
Right. And
Explains me, I guess.
Yeah, it does actually. Like it explains a lot. But the
I mean, I was 13. I think I was 14 at the 2000 election.
right. And then you would have
would I have
been
been?
how old? You would have been 22 in the 2008 crash.
Yeah.
Right, where suddenly the financial system is a
Crazy.
rigged game. Right, like these.
I voted for Obama and regretted it almost immediately.
These are the effects that these collapses have, right? But you know so you're right that it's sort of it's slower, but when the military, I mean, I feel for them. They're in a very, very difficult position, and they swore an oath to the Constitution. I think they take it with absolute massive seriousness.
I got one for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you familiar with the coup attempt in Turkey several years ago?
Yeah, sure.
So
That was an interesting one.
right. So
Yeah.
this may be at the time outdated because I've not followed up on it.
Yeah.
But the general idea is, I remember I was in some city, I'm doing some interview, and we get word that the Bosphorus Bridge
Right.
has been occupied by a coup force under certain leaders. A story that emerged was that these young men who served in the Turkish armed forces were given a lawful order to defend the Bosphorus Bridge from a terror attack.
Right.
They showed up, no idea what's going on. Then they were mercilessly beaten and dragged to the street by civilians because it was reported these people were attempting to stage a military coup against
Right.
Erdogan. So the argument is, in the United States, what may happen? And a lot of people are like, you really think that the armed forces are going to go and round people up or do X or do Y? What will happen, or what could happen, is that there will be a simple lawful order that does not raise alarm bells for any like lower ranking enlisted guy. And they say, we're getting reports of a potential riot, so the National Guard, we're going to have you guys deployed to the streets. And then a bunch of National Guardsmen come out, surround a building because they're like, I guess we're here to defend it. And then the news reports, National Guard stages coup attempt. And these guys are everyone points the finger at them. And it could be a mistake. It could be intentional. But the idea is, you don't need National Guardsmen or military servicemen to decide to stage a coup. They won't know what they're doing is the coup when they're given a lawful order.
Well, I mean, the first chapter of the next Civil War, I talked to the colonel responsible for drawing up what they call full spectrum operations in the homeland, right? So that's when they absolutely have. I mean, they have a plan for everything, right? They're the U.S. military. They have a plan for conquering Canada. They have a plan for
Yes!
They have a plan.
Let's go.
There's no contingency plan that they don't have, right? Like they just sit around.
Well, Canada's rightfully ours. I mean, it's just obvious.
When you need the water, you probably will come. But we
almost got Quebec. We almost did.
When
1812, I think.
Oh no, you never had a chance. That wasn't us. That was just the British.
Right.
And burned the White House to the ground.
That's it, right.
Trying to do it.
We tried. I think we took Montreal for a little bit. But
Well,
anyway,
you burned Toronto
Toronto
in
that-
1814. Yeah, you burned Toronto to the ground.
We were so close.
Yeah, you
but
were
anyway,
so close. Well, in the first Civil War, Lincoln's Department of War had, they said, well, we have this army. Why don't we march north and take Canada first? That's why Canada was on the side of the South the whole of the Civil War.
Really?
Right, because it was like
I did not know that.
Lincoln, like they made a casual remark, and that event is why we became a country. Right?
Abraham Lincoln's like,
no
Canada, you're
idea.
next.
We were a bunch of colonies, like
Yeah.
sprinkled across the northern part of North America. And then Lincoln's Minister of War was like, should we go take Montreal? And we were like, we better get our ducks in a row. Like, it's time to actually get this shit together. That's why we confederated. That's why we became a country.
Wow,
Right?
but Canada sided with the South?
Yeah, 100%.
Really?
Yeah, so did the British.
Yeah.
They were... it was just national interest, right?
Yeah, economically,
Yeah.
it made more sense for the
Yeah, they
British
were.
side of the South.
Yeah, the cotton was absolutely necessary to
Yep.
the mills in.
Wow.
So
I didn't know
were-
that about Canada, though.
How many times does America have to kick England's butt?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I also think it makes
they're not
sense.
worth it anymore.
All right, yeah.
It makes sense for the British side with the South because it splits the United States.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I don't think they were thinking it was. They weren't anywhere near that sophisticated. It was just like, we need stuff for our mills.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, in these scenarios where the military is the last holder of value, that's where you get really nightmare scenarios for the military, right? Like, they're faced with choices that are extremely bad. I mean, well, that's the point of this book, and the point of the next Civil War is like, it's not to think about this as like good guys, bad guys. It's like actually what you're dealing are people who are faced with terrible choices and terrible incentives.
Did you ever read about what happened in Egypt with the first and second revolutions 10 years ago?
No, I didn't.
The scary thing is, and again,
well, I read some of it, but I don't know what part.
It's been a very long time since I've been involved. Everybody knows, I bring it up quite a bit, that I was there. During the Second Revolution.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it was like July 4th even, which is kind of crazy. But
like Tahrir Square, that stuff.
Tahrir, yeah, I was I was actually watching the revolution take place. The Apaches flying over.
Oh my God.
And the APCs. So what happens is you have a country ruled by the military for a very long time. People eventually say it's time for elections. We want change. Majority of the country is secular, and they do not want Islamic rule or theocracy.
Right.
What happens then is they say, let's have an election. There are like 10 different parties, 9 of which are secular, and 1 is the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, guess what? In a first past the post voting system, whoever gets the most votes wins. The Muslim Brotherhood gets 20%, everyone else gets 9%, and then the Muslim Brotherhood wins.
Right.
So a year later, another revolution takes place against the Muslim Brotherhood. Once again, it looks like the Muslim Brotherhood is going to win the elections. Even ousting the president is not going to change the fact the largest voting bloc is Muslim. So the military goes and starts executing and massacring Muslims.
Right.
They start going to where these protests are happening and just gunning people down.
Yeah.
Because the military's thought was this country will never stabilize so long as this group exists.
Right.
So they decide, for the sake of the 80%, we're going to shut down violently and oppressively the 20%. It's a way more complicated than that, and this is probably outdated, just to be clear.
Yeah, but also like the number one, like when you look at the metrics, the number one attribute that leads to having a coup is that you've had one before, right? Like, and the more that you have them, the more that you're likely to have them.
Because people see it.
Because people see it and they understand it as a political choice, right? But so that's not really that's not on the cards for the United States. Right, like that's not something like
Civil War is.
But Civil War is.
We've had one of those before.
We've had 2, right? The first one was the Revolution.
Right.
Right. And so it is absolutely built into the DNA of the country to have these kind of civil wars. But the role of the military won't be, taking the other side and executing them. I just don't see, as pessimistic as some of this stuff is, that's just very on the extreme edge of unlikelihood. What is much more likely is that they're in a constant struggle to impose order on a country that is in political and hyperpartisan chaos.
Similar to Syria, right? So like that
would be the worst, or between Ireland and Syria. Right, like
I'm not sure what you're talking about with Ireland, the troubles and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, like where Syria would be the ultra worst, where you're dealing with death squads.
So wait, our best case scenario is the Troubles.
Well, you're already past the Troubles.
You're already combat in the street, though.
Pardon me?
We don't have gunfights in the street over politics.
Yes, we do.
I'm talking about high level gunfights. And I understand there have been fights where people are throwing Molotovs and stuff, but I'm talking about dudes actually like setting up L-shaped ambushes on opposing forces.
White power people go into black churches and kill everybody in the name of a political cause. Like, I'm sorry, that's like that.
And real quick, for the people screaming partisanship, I think we'll just also bring up the trans shooter who went to the Christian school,
or the riots in 2020.
Yeah,
right. Like
I understand, but the point that I'm making is that's still different between like militarized units making actual attacks on like a police station to kill everybody and take the location.
It's just a different type of terrorism.
It's true. There's a few questions. Is the difference due to we are not there yet? Is it due to this country is much larger, or is it due to a shift in tactics and warfare? So we've had police stations boarded up, like in the Chaz Chop. They shut that police station down, and they opened fire and killed. Like they unloaded rifles on an SUV, killing 2 teenagers. It may have been 1. So
and then you also have police people not wearing badges going out to fight. Like these are like, you're right that it's not the IRA versus the English army. Yeah. Right. Like that's not what you have here. But you have it's called stochastic terrorism. Yeah. And it's fundamentally just a shift in the whole culture.
And I want to clarify real quick too. With the Troubles, you have occupation. You have the British are in Northern Ireland. Yeah. In Seattle, it is dominated by a left-wing worldview. In Miami, for instance, clearly dominated by a more right-wing worldview. There's no reason I got to make this point because this one really bugs me. People will say things like, Civil War, Tim? Why don't you go outside and talk to someone? Do you think a civil war is going to happen? And I'm like,
go and talk to them. I did for
hold on,
years,
look,
man.
Do you think during the Civil War, right before the Civil War started, a guy who walked out of his door in Atlanta and talked to his neighbor would conclude a civil war is going to happen? He'd go to his neighbor and be like, hey, what do you think about all this? I completely agree with you. Everything's fine. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
The issue is Seattle and Miami are worlds apart from each other, physically and ideologically.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get the troubles because Miami is not occupying Seattle, but you are going to see an increase in violence. We did see that with protests.
Yeah.
And what I think people misunderstand about a potential civil war, they think state versus state doesn't need to be.
No. That's not.
That.
That's certainly not anything that I like. The experts that I talk to, that's not what we're talking
Exactly.
about. Right. Like we're talking about like the delegitimization of the political process, the rise of violence as a solution, the classic method of like trying to tamp down violence by overarching state control, which then leads to more violence. And that is a process that's been played out, literally dozens and dozens of times over history, and it never goes well.
Here's my fear. A few scenarios. We've known for a while that there are militias on the southern border.
Yeah.
They've been around for a long time. But now a video just came out and it gave me that sinking feeling.
Just one? I get like 5 videos a day that give me a sinking
No,
feeling.
fair point. But this one in particular, I think it's Texas, set up razor wire barriers to stop illegal immigration.
Yeah.
The federal government came in and got a backloader to lift the razor wire up and to allow hundreds of people to illegally enter the country. This is there is no way. It doesn't matter what your perspective is on immigration or otherwise. If the state law in the state is saying, we say, no, it's illegal, and we buy a barrier, and the federal government says, we don't care what you're doing, we're subverting your state sovereignty.
In violation of the federal laws, too.
Absolutely.
But, this is something it's happening slower. Like, I don't know about this particular example, but like, one of the things that's happening, it truly is bipartisan, is that states are using their resistance to the federal authority as a vote winner in their own states.
Yep.
Right. And that's equally true in California as it is for Texas, as it is for Florida, where they are, and that is just playing with fire. I mean, for everyone, like you were dealing with, where you have this, and you have things like, who was the attorney general under Trump? What was his name?
He had more than
Bill
one.
Barr.
No. I'm thinking about the old guy.
Right.
I forget his name. But he had to go to California and say to them, you are in violation of federal authority.
Yep. They don't care.
We are and they did change it. But like it is one of those things where it's like, it's so shallow, this thinking. Like it's so shallow, this thinking. It's like you have to, if you don't have a basic solidarity, you're not going to survive as a country.
And this is a really good example, the various sanctuary ideas that are popping up. But the point I wanted to make with the militias, when you have the state of Texas saying, by our laws and our borders, be it so, and the federal government, in violation of its own laws and the state, uses the border patrol to act as the inverse. It's almost like Fahrenheit 451. The firemen don't put the fires out, they make the fires. My fear is it only takes 5 guys with weapons to go down there and say, if you won't do it, we will. We have the law on our side.
Well, when you have a situation where you don't know what the law is,
but we do.
And there's no when you don't have a legitimate Supreme Court, this is how countries fall apart.
Yeah.
This is what happens in Brazil and Argentina and these places. Like you're not immune to this.
Well,
right? Just because you're super rich.
I definitely want to talk about the courts too, but real quick on this point.
Yeah.
We know what the laws are. If you want to come to this country, you file the paperwork, you go through a process. Yeah. If Texas is trying to uphold the law and the federal government is actively subverting the law, you are going to get people in Texas saying outright, the state is illegitimate. It's breaking the law intentionally. And that's when you get people who, what happens is you get the political equivalent of God is on my side. The people,
wasn't it Abbott who had the what was the thing where they called in the militia against military exercises in Texas? It was like in 2014. What was it called?
Really?
Well, the conspiracy theory.
I don't know.
Where like they called in the Texas National Guard against military activities by the U.S. forces, just exercises. Wow. What was it called? But it was like, the idea was, but the Texas governor was saying this is the federal government coming to take away Texas sovereignty in a massive push, right? And it was like this was before I did it. What was it called? I think it started with a J.
Jade Helm?
Yes, that's it.
Hysteria over Jade Helm exercise in Texas was fueled by Russians, former CIA director said.
Right. Like this was a misinformation. And then when you pour that on, then you just get this unbelievable tension, right? Which is just not sustainable.
Let's go ham. I think we are nearing the point where all courts are basically illegitimate in this country.
Well, no one respects them.
Well,
right?
but the first thing people need to understand is people really need to watch civil trials.
Yeah.
It really is supposed to be a judge as a neutral arbiter hearing arguments and then deciding which argument makes the most sense. Mm-hmm. It really is as simple as that. You watch a trial and the judge is like, what do you mean by 5%? Like, you're talking about on the revenue? And the guy goes, yeah, I'm saying when he agreed to this contract. And the judge goes, well, how do you respond to that? And the judge goes, interesting. I actually think he's right. That's really how simple it is. Mm-hmm. But now what's happening is with the hyper-partisan split, you are getting judges who are saying, my worldview is clearly on one side or the other, and they're going to issue their ruling on one side or the other. And the other side's going to be like, how could you possibly think that? Yeah. They're clearly corrupt. And when this begins to happen,
that's the like when you look at something like the history of Chile, like that is what happened, right? Like it's like slowly, and then people start to lose faith in other systems, and then it just becomes like my family versus your family, right? Like I mean, it becomes really on that basis.
Yep. And red or blue.
And I remember having a friend who came back from living in Saudi Arabia for he was making money there for something, and I said, "What did you miss most about living in Canada?" And I expecting maple syrup or some shit, right? or something, like I missed the hockey or something, yeah. Right? And he said equality under the law, right? He said, if you're driving and you hit the wrong person in Saudi Arabia, even if it's not your fault, you're done.
If you're a woman and you get raped,
yeah,
you go to jail for having sex out of marriage.
And when you the ultimate luxury, the ultimate heritage that we have been passed down by our forefathers and foremothers is equality under the law. When that is gone, you are just in anarchy.
So 2020 isn't the first, but I believe it was a gigantic spike through the heart of this nation in terms of how the courts handled the election. There was many spikes.
For sure, but that was one of them, I guess.
Not one of them. So you have all of the lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign and Trump campaign allies. You get the media lying about what happened, and many of the courts ruling on standing, not merit. It doesn't matter if you think Trump is right or wrong. The rulings need to be on merit, not standing. Yeah. And the standing argument is a cop-out, so the courts don't have to take responsibility. This was a big problem. With the case of Texas v. Pennsylvania, are you familiar with this one?
Which one is that one?
48 states.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay.
Suing over whether or not states were in violation of the Constitution in how they handled their elections.
Yeah.
Because
their own constitutions.
Own constitutions.
Oh, yes.
The argument being courts and executive branches altered the rules of an election in a state where the Constitution says only the state legislature can do this.
Yeah.
The argument from Texas being if Pennsylvania's election is not sound, then their votes should not count against ours. There's a dispute here that needs to be answered.
I mean, this is the end of...
The Supreme Court said we don't care and refused to hear what's called original jurisdiction, state versus state, saying answer this constitutional question so we know, and the Supreme Court said no.
And the reason they didn't is because they were afraid of having to find in Donald Trump's favor.
Or against him.
They
did not want to, they didn't want to answer the question at all. They could have taken the case and said Trump's wrong. But only Thomas and Alito said, we have to hear this. This is the rules of this country. And everyone else said, we don't want to be involved in this.
But I mean, I think the problem here is that those rules are just being eroded, right? And the faith in those rules is just being eroded.
Just
like it's not like
it's being lawyered to the most digital.
But it's
granular.
not just a question of like lawyering is not the problem. The problem here is that this system is from 18th century. Like, and it's not, and it's like, it's not like, this is the thing. It's easy to get angry, and it's easy to get like, you did this and you did that. But like, actually the problem here is that these systems mean that no one feels like their voice is heard politically.
Yeah.
So, right? Like, conservatives keep sending Republicans to Washington to change it, and it doesn't ever change. And then they go, and then they get really angry and they blame. But it's like, the lesson here is that no one is actually having influence. I mean, this is what like Andrew explained. He betrayed his political class. He told me the truth of how it works. And when you look at the influences, you look at the incentives for people, there's just no incentive to actually listen to the public.
Right. I want to clarify too as to what at least my view is, and then I don't know if you agree or not, but
yeah.
The Constitution, as you mentioned earlier, a work of genius, but 18th century genius. And I think that's correct. The core ideas of why we did it and the ideas behind it are correct, but we have way more people now. We have tremendously different systems of communication. And so
let me ask you a question.
Just the final thought is, it doesn't mean, I'm not saying the Constitution is wrong or anything. I'm just saying the perspective of it is rooted in, it doesn't take into consideration a lot of things that are different today. And I don't know how you rectify that.
Well, this is my question
Amendments,
for you.
perhaps.
What, America is starting again. America has a constitutional convention. They get together. What is the Constitution that they make look like to you?
So
what are the principles that actually unify the United States? Today, right now. Honestly, think the fact that you're stunned by that question.
Anti-war is probably no foreign intervention is probably going to pull the highest.
You can keep freedom of speech, right? Like I think everyone in America. You don't think so, eh?
No.
Jesus, is that how bad it is?
Well, so
you can't even agree on the First Amendment. You can't even agree on rule number 1 of the Bill of Rights.
So for the past 10 years, the start of the culture war in this country was social media platforms. I'll give you the Twitter example because this is the one I was involved in with Jack Dorsey, Joe Rogan. Twitter says if you misgender someone, we will ban you from this platform permanently.
Right. Yeah.
And I said, what does misgendering mean? Because conservatives, if you go to someone who's biologically male and say she, you've misgendered them. To liberals, if you go to someone who says, call me she, but you don't, you've misgendered them. Two distinct worldviews, and you've chosen to enforce one.
Right.
Free speech would argue, you guys decide, just keep it respectful. No. You look at Twitter, and what do you get? You got people on the left would post pictures of wood chippers for the Covington kids, and people on the right would get banned for saying #learn-to-code. The left perspective in this country was, if it is hurtful, it's not free speech. At the same time, we're allowed to be hurtful.
It's one of the things that's fascinating to me about watching American politics. I mean, it does bleed into Canada, but it's not anywhere near as intense, is how the left comes up with ideas and then the right takes them on and just like book banning in libraries, like that was started by left-wing groups, right? And then the right took it on and was like, let's do this for real. Like let's start to ban all these books.
But so let's clarify that.
Well,
there are real examples like To Kill a Mockingbird.
I actually want to let's get back to because I actually want to. I'm fascinated by this question. This is now the question that I think might follow this one.
Yeah,
is like
what unifies this country?
Okay, we all understand that it's broken. Right. We all understand that like this system is just not functioning. And like, you can have your pride in the Constitution. I get it. It's a beautiful document. Like I get why you would want to stand behind it, but it just doesn't work. Right. What is the document that would work? And if you're telling me that you can't even agree on freedom of speech,
but
how are you going to get to?
But hold on. What is commonly referred to as the right in the United States is pro-free speech, even for people who they don't like and don't agree with. The left is opposed to free speech explicitly.
It's some and some. Listen, I've met these people.
Right, but it's dominant and dominant.
There's a huge majority right in the middle who actually believes exactly what you said before. Disagreements are fine. Be respectful. Like, be a decent human being. But you're allowed to say whatever the hell you want. That is 80% of the United States. There's 10% on either side who think those people should be annihilated.
But look. There are extremists on both sides,
Yeah.
fact, but it is the dominant left-wing view of suppression and the dominant right-wing view of open speech.
No. That's I mean I
Then-
just
then
I
why
think if
is
you
it
look
that-
I think
that
if you
Elon
look at
Musk
the
is-
government actions, if you look at if you look at like Florida's take on book ban, I mean there are
But the
many,
no, wait,
many-
hold on, hold on.
Florida is
This is why I asked-
only in libraries. It's only
No, hold
it's
on, hold
only
on.
curation. What you're talking about is curation. You're not talking about banning. You're talking about selecting
Okay.
what will and will
But
not
wait,
go
wait.
into a library.
But this is-
not whether or not you can get it. Curation is not banning. Those are two different things.
But this is why I was getting into the granular element of what is book banning, because what you were saying is children should have access to adult content.
Well, what I would say, I mean, what I genuinely believe is, I mean, I believe in letting people read whatever the hell they want.
I don't think 12-year-olds should learn about blowjobs.
I totally disagree.
You think you should
100%.
You think they should have a book? You see, this is the problem.
No. I mean, well, just like someone as a parent.
What about
like? I mean,
scat?
I think hiding information from children, like let me tell you something. Adults are not smart enough to know what children need to know. And also, if you hide information from them, they find it. They just find it in a different way.
Well, so this is a big
like
component.
this is a practical question. It's not a question of like morality or anything like that.
No, it is.
Well,
So-
I mean, morality is of very little interest to me.
So the issue is it's not about the
Left
right,
or right.
The right has decided to ban books. The right is upholding a very basic moral standard that's been in this country for a long time. You can call it traditional. For instance, in
I mean, I have no interest in morality, left or right.
sure,
like
sure.
morality is,
But I'm not
there's
saying
nothing more blinding than moral clarity.
I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying this is a core component in what's ripping this country apart.
Yeah,
People on the right. So we have a book over here called "This Book Is Gay."
right.
A teacher had the police called on her because the book explains how to use Grindr. And she was instructing 10 to 12-year-olds on how to use a gay adult dating app. Well, if children were to use that app, they'd be not only in violation of the terms of the app, but they would be engaging in, not themselves, but illegal activity with those adults.
You don't have kids, right?
No.
Dude, every kid who has a phone has access to the sum total
That
of
doesn't
all
mean they should.
grossness
But
of
hold
information.
on, hold on,
my
hold on.
point is like an actual
That's not
book
my point.
is probably better for them than if they go on their phone and say, what is a blowjob?
But my point is not what the kids should be doing. My point is the distinction between the left and the right. In this country, up until the advent of the internet, if a child walked into an adult bookstore and the person who ran the store let them in, they would be criminally charged for it. When the internet comes out, we see the emergence of what we would describe as the modern left saying, yeah, well, you got a phone, the kids can see it anyway. The traditional American position has for the past 100 years has been do not give kids access to contraband because they're not ready for it or for whatever reason. And the left is, well, it's there, so be it.
See, listen, I think it's the same to me. Now, I am somewhat of an outsider here, but like the same thing is happening where it's like, where they're banning, like they're taking out all the offensive references in Roald Dahl. Like that's what the left does.
Right.
I hate it. Like it's totally unacceptable to me. Like the books are supposed to be left in their raw state for children to come and understand them and make their own minds up and deal with reality. And it's the same thing to me with these other examples you have. Like first of all, this is not about what's the benefit for the children because nobody knows what a book does to a child, right? Like that's part of the power of reading, right?
If the book is
nobody knows.
Hold on. If the book says here's how you use Grindr, then the effect is a child learns how to use Grindr.
No, that's what could easily happen is they would go, that is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life.
No, I know, but they still know how to use it. I'm talking about fact-based 1, 2, 3, 4.
We are in an information age. I mean, the idea that you're going to keep information
I'm not making
from
that point.
children is just ludicrous. I don't want to. My point here is only that these debates that happen are removed from the actual life of experience doing this stuff. Now, I mean,
what do you mean?
Well, because when you're parenting, you're dealing with a world where your children are exposed to everything. That's the actual plight of a parent, right? Like the actual plight of a parent is like, my children can go on and look up on YouTube and see a woman having sex with an icicle, right? Like that is so all these debates around these books, that's nothing. Right,
well, it's an attempt by the right to
debates-
stop these things.
I still want to point. I want
They
to.
certainly are not trying to attempt to stop that stuff.
They absolutely are.
These are internecine debates among themselves for like point scoring. It has nothing to do with actual policy. It has nothing to do with actual how are we educating our children.
It's literally about the curation of of school libraries. There is no ban on the content of these books.
In my city, in Mississauga.
That's Canada, not Florida.
The school board pulled every book in a left wing fury. Pulled every book written before 2008.
Did Amazon?
No, but listen, that's so
the point.
It's so wrong.
Amazon
to me
has banned books.
Amazon has absolutely banned books.
but
they're also a market. But my point is I hate that.
But my point,
I hate that so much.
listen,
my point is the argument that you're making about curation is not an argument about banning. And we're talking about this as if it is about banning. This is not about banning. This is about what goes into schools. This particular topic is about what goes into school libraries, and that makes a difference. Because there has to be curation, because there's no way you can have every book in a school library. And they're going to decide which ones are acceptable and which are not. And to classify it as banning or call it censorship is to deceive what people are talking about. It's not censorship.
Save me, Tim.
Censorship does not mean we censor a lot. We censor a lot of things like child abuse videos on the internet.
Yes, for sure.
We have people that we decide some things cross a moral line and we don't want that publicly available. That's a fact.
But it's not that it's publicly. It's only in public schools. The curation is what I'm talking about.
Censorship is just an authority deciding what should or should not be available and what should be removed.
And that's my point. That's my exact point.
My point here is this debate. You're saying I say this, he says this. I don't care right now for the sake of conversation. Obviously, if you watch Timcast IRL, you're going to get my heavy opinions, these whatever. My point here is look at the distinction in how we see the world. Mm-hmm. There is no rectifying that. So when we go back to the original question of what document unifies this country.
Now let's return to that, because that is actually the more interesting question.
My final point is when Jen Kuger came on this show, I think we had a great conversation, and I tried to explain to me so we can have a conversation and literally try to find where we're going to win together.
Right.
We can argue about the other stuff after.
Yeah, right.
And when it came to the question of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, Cenk said, I don't care what it's about. It's racist. Therefore, it's done. Don't defend him. Don't explain, period.
Wow.
My worldview is, what's the truth? How did this happen and how do we stop it from happening?
Well, it's just not a system, right? You need an actual system. His
view was, a black man died, therefore it's racist, and there's no excuse.
Right.
So there's two very distinct worldviews.
Those are cases. No one is ever going to be satisfied with the actual working out of the world, right? It's not like we have a huge housing problem. We have got all these problems. We got a lot of problems of our own. On the other hand, I feel like we have a system for working them out. What I feel in the United States is, one thing when you're a Canadian is Americans they're great. There's nothing wrong with Americans, right? Americans are great, and if you have conversations with them, they absolutely are sensible, reasonable people. It's just that the system in which they operate their politics is so defunct and collapsing that it doesn't matter. Everyone in this book on either side is a good person.
Right.
That is one thing we wanted to do in the book, because it's politics is not made up of bad people. It's made up of actually good people with incentives that are so poor that it annihilates them.
I do think we have a lot of evil people in government.
I actually don't. I think there are idiots and there are players and there are people of this nature and there are people who become corrupt. But there are Jamie, a good person in a system with evil incentives cannot work is much worse than an evil person in a system with good incentives.
I see what you're saying.
It is the system, right? That creates these monsters.
I make a similar point that, Ian Crossland has made this point that you can do good with evil people. So there can be a very, very evil person who's smiling and being like, I just found out the fastest way to make a ton of money.
Right.
People love dogs. and I'm going to convince them to give me money, and all I got to do is save dogs. And their intention is personal gain, profit, and power, but the path to doing it is saving homeless dogs and creating dog shelters. Like, the best path for an evil person to gain power and do their awful things could be something we actually have no problem with. Then there could be good people who are like, I want to save 1 million people, but I would have to change this policy, which is going to negatively impact a ton of people in a bad way.
Oh, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Exactly. So it's possible. But that being said, I'm just going to come out and say it. I think Adam Schiff is evil.
Listen, I don't really believe they're evil people.
Oh, dude.
I think there are people in situations, like the reason you write a novel, like the reason we did this as a novel rather than a nonfiction book is because what the novel is about, what the novel does better than anything is people in situations. Right? Like, how do people respond to the environments they're in? Like, people are not...
Well, but there's the banality of evil, right?
Oh, 100%.
And so you can be an evil person while bumbling about.
Well, that's exactly it. That's why it's so important to know that if you were put in the situation that an evil person wasn't, you could easily end up like them. That is the basis of humanism, right? It's like...
Some people, most people.
It is a reaction between yourself and the situation you find yourself in. That's life, right? Like, that's the actual substance of life. It's not like he's evil, he's good. He came out as some kind of shining knight out of the womb. She came out as some kind of monster. Like, that's not the reality.
Well, the reality is true good and true evil are very rare, but they do exist. And the average person, as you mentioned, is a victim of
I've never met it. I put that in for everyone.
You've never met an evil person?
No, well, I've met psychopaths, and I've met people, and I've met sociopaths.
I suppose it's a question how do you define evil?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, the farther I go, like in life, I just think tout comprendre et tout pardonner, right? Like to understand is to pardon, right? Like if you understand where people find themselves in the situations they find themselves in, like these people end America, the good guys.
So
right, but it's not because of them. It's because of it's not because of their hearts.
I'll give you an example of what of one component I view to be evil. I talk about
this got
super
evil. Philosophical super fast.
Everything is metaphysical.
We're going to be talking about like St. Augustine soon or something.
Well, yes. Before we go, I want to address that real quick. The reason that we have such differing opinions in the problems coming down on whether or not the First Amendment is worth saving is because people are now fighting about whether or not they believe in Enlightenment principles or if they believe in postmodern principles, and it's a metaphysical, philosophical difference. It's not because when the Constitution was written, it was kind of a given that the Enlightenment was the way to the Enlightenment principles are what you should base your society on because you could come in contact with reality. Since then, there's been a lot. We've had Nietzsche, we've had Hegel, we've had Marx, we've had a lot of philosophers that have really kind of turned that upside down. And now we're living in postmodern times where people are more
it's identity based.
It's not. Well, it's identity based because of postmodernism.
Yeah,
because there is no truth, there is no right, there is no correct. So the things that we're talking about boil down to metaphysical.
I would just tell you,
but correction. They don't say there's no truth. They say there is no truth but power.
Yes, postmodern. Yes, right. Absolutely.
But I want to make a point.
Power comes out of the barrel of a gun.
I'll explain to
power is words to them.
Yeah.
But dominance, influence, control. Yeah. An example of evil, in my opinion, that I experienced is during Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
These people are protesting. They're protesting for a reason. Many of these people want a better life. And I met a prominent journalist who worked for a large publication who we had a conversation. This is a prominent activist at Occupy Wall Street and journalist. And I said, look, I agree. I'm fairly nihilistic, honestly. I don't know what matters or why we do the things we do, what the end result is going to be. So the only thing I can do is try to maximize the things that we think are good. Creation, preservation, and the positive things in life. And the response I got from this person was, but don't you just want to make it all burn? Like, if you don't care, then nothing matters. Let's just shake it up and burn it to the ground. This is a prominent writer for a major publication who told me that their motivations behind everything they do was the destruction of stable society, of success, and to watch people struggle and burn because nothing matters anyway.
Let me tell you a story.
That's evil.
Let me tell you a story. Like, I remember talking to this researcher when I was doing this podcast on child rearing, right? And we were doing this episode on spanking and shouting, right? And like whether you should spank or shout at your kids. And I talked to the leading expert on the world on discipline, on childhood discipline, who believed, and I came to agree with him, that not only is spanking ineffective, but also shouting at your children is ineffective. Like you shouldn't actually do this. It's not necessarily that it's bad parenting, it's just, it doesn't work, right? And he told me a story once about how he was working in a lab with a guy who beat his kid every day. And he was analyzing him and trying to figure out what he did, right? And part of me was like, why didn't you just arrest this guy? Right? Like, surely a man who beats his son every day should just be in jail. But he was, this researcher, by studying this person, by removing himself from the question of good and evil, by analyzing it, had come to the most powerful insights about child rearing that had ever existed. Right? So to me, like, yeah, and he talked this guy out of doing that, by the way. Right, like the man obviously wanted to improve and was trying to get the violence out of him, and like he talked him out of that. And I always thought, I don't know how I feel about it, right? But I'm not sure what the correct response here is. But I would say that what I feel my role is in this world is to try to understand so that we can get to better things, rather than just saying you beat your kid every day, you're a monster. It's like, okay, well, how do we understand this?
I agree.
And how do we make it better?
And so there's certain things that I see, certain questions, right? Is it a bad thing when someone cries over the death of a child? What I mean to say is it bad their child died and they're suffering now because of it?
Yeah.
The answer is obviously yes.
Yeah.
We do not want, as human beings, someone to experience the death of their child and then to cry over that. We want to figure out how to prevent that from happening. You end up with various degrees of good and evil when it comes to these things. And what I mean by that is people who are trying to help other people experience love and joy, preserve the things that make them happy and help make the world a better place. And there are people who are trying to extract from a system to benefit themselves either emotionally or through resource. So there are people in government.
And there are people like the one you described who's just pure rage. Let's all burn it down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is the Batman, Dark Knight, when
he
said
Joker stuff. Yeah.
Alfred is explaining to Bruce Wayne, this guy thought it was good sport.
Right.
He was stealing these gems and throwing them in the river. He just didn't care. It was funny.
Yeah.
So that's, and then there's the Johnny Appleseed. I'm going to go and just grow trees for no reason because it helps everybody. So these things exist.
Johnny Appleseed. God, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
I'm just like,
we need another Johnny Appleseed. Where are the Johnny Appleseeds of today?
Just to decide to go walk throwing Appleseed.
You should have a Johnny Appleseed prize where you go and find the Johnny Appleseeds in America.
That's a good idea.
That's what philosophers are, though.
No.
Well, no.
They're selfish people who are extracting from the system, for sure.
No, but it is a good idea to find someone who's just been doing good, selfless things without expectation of reward.
That would be a hit.
Yeah. Well, let's do this instead of just drifting off into philosophy. Let's bring it back to earth, and let's talk about the 14th Amendment and Donald Trump's trials right now, because we were talking about courts and legitimacy. So Colorado, Minnesota, Michigan are currently in the legal process of determining whether or not Trump can even be president.
Yes.
And so the point I made was that if the Democrats succeed in having, I should even say this right now, the fact that eligibility is even a question is already destroying what is left of our electoral system. And the Supreme Court needs to come down immediately, bang the gavel within the next month, even today, and say, states cannot determine eligibility. And the reason for this is...
But that's not the legal system you have.
Well, I understand, but here's what will happen. An argument made in Minnesota by, I believe it was Trump's lawyer, is that the federal constitution determines eligibility, not the states.
Yes.
It is not a question of the states to determine who can or can't be on the ballot, or who is eligible to be president. I'm sorry. They do determine ballot access, which then creates an interesting question. If the states are going to make the ballots for their own elections and determine who's going to be on it, there is a question of eligibility. But if the states have the ultimate right to say who is eligible or not, what will happen is in 2028, you will not have an election. All that will matter is the eligibility hearing.
Yeah.
And the question of what's the most important day in a political campaign, it's going to be eligibility day. And the lawyers for the politician will say, it's 1 year before the election. Let's gear up our eligibility arguments to get this guy disqualified. That way, when the election happens, we're the only one on the ballot.
Well, even worse It won't even be that, because what they'll do is the eligibility stuff will just be prep work for non-certification.
Yep.
Right.
And that's exactly.
Because the non-certification is like, if non-certification happens, it just goes to a contingent election.
I got
right. So that is an automatic mechanism. So all this other, like, is it the states' right? Is it this? These are very complex legal arguments that there's multiple facets to and multiple sides, but the certification needs to be solved one day.
You made an excellent point.
Like, so
real quick.
Yeah.
I've been talking about this since the Trump thing started, that especially big yesterday. If the states go to eligibility arguments instead, then Trump's not on the ballot in California, or then Biden's not on the ballot in Texas. But then what happens is, as you just pointed out, if they don't remove any names, come certification time, 10,000 lawsuits are filed saying you can't certify, this person is not eligible.
Yeah, and you have an election denier as Speaker of the House, like currently. Right, like
they're all election deniers.
Let's just
Democrats and Republicans have all denied it.
But honest to God, like what you just mentioned, that's one of about 50 things. Like in the book, like like there's like that's part of the problem. But honestly, there's like 80 other things that could go wrong, and increasingly look like they just will go wrong.
And there's only one real question.
Yeah, who believes?
Who does the military side with? It's in the book.
I mean, that's because the book is like, it's not a question of who the military is going to be put in a position where they have to pick a side.
Yep.
And that's, they don't want to pick a side at all.
Not at all.
None of them. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, they take their oath to the Constitution. I mean, it's the last thing holding this country together is the military's faith in their oath, right?
So everybody enlist. Go get your commissions now.
I want to point, like, just one thing you said struck me. The military's faith in their oath to the Constitution is the thing that you say that is keeping the country together, or one of the few things.
I would say it's the only thing that I genuinely feel is stable.
The federal government has demonized people that would keep their oath to the Constitution. If you're a member of the quote unquote oath keepers, you're considered a bad guy, and it doesn't matter. Listen, I know what you're going to say. You're going to talk about nuance.
Yes.
The nuance does not matter. The nuance does not matter.
Are a militia.
The nuance does not matter because they're demonizing the Betsy Ross flag. They're demonizing anything that is connected to our founding.
Oath keepers don't even matter.
They don't matter.
The government came out and said members of the military who post the Gadsden flag on their Facebook are extremists.
Yes.
And that is quite literally the license plate of Virginia.
Yes.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. The same thing sort of happened in Algeria, where because it was a revolutionary constitution, like because it was formed by militiamen, fundamentally, the Constitution of Algeria has very similar problems and reflections of its militia past as the U.S. Constitution. And it's the same thing, because it's like you're a country founded by rebels.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. You're a country founded by people who defy authority. I'm in Canada. We're the obedient ones. We're the ones who said to the crown.
We begged you. We begged. We were like, everyone talks about the 13 colonies. They don't understand there were way more colonies under the crown.
And we were like, no thanks.
Yeah.
Enjoy your war. Right.
Enjoy your war.
And like the people who came are loyalists, right? Like that's what they were. And so that rebellious structure built into the foundation of the country. I mean, it's always been in tension. Right, like I don't think that tension has ever gone away. I mean, think of the elections we've mentioned: 1828, 1824, 1876. Yeah. We haven't even brought up the 60s, right? Like we haven't even brought up like the civil unrest in the 60s, which until 4 years ago, everyone was like, "Oh, this isn't as bad as the 60s." I mean, can you imagine?
It's still
how little they
I disagree.
It's still not as bad as the 60s.
I disagree.
You think it's worse than the 60s?
So the bombings,
it's way worse.
The bombings were shock and awe. Like the Weather Underground, for instance, was not trying to kill people, though I think there was like one instance with the bank robbery.
The Weather Underground were 1,000 people. Like they were compared to the Oath Keepers, compared to the 3%. I mean,
how many Oath Keepers are there?
Well, they don't know. But it's certainly in the tens of thousands.
But again,
right? The list that got leaked was 60,000, wasn't it?
I have no idea.
And that was just, but
The
that was just
point of me
people in
bringing
power.
the point of me bringing up the Oath Keepers was because you talked about the Oath. It's not specifically about the Oath Keepers. It's about the demonization of anyone that looks to the Revolutionary War period as a core principle for the American people.
Yeah.
They're
So
trying.
it's not just the Oath Keepers or the Threepers or whatever.
right,
it's
right.
about, if you believe in the things that the founders believed in, you're a threat to the government or you're a threat to America.
They want to excise that rebellious.
Well, and
beginning.
remember, George Washington did it, right? Whiskey Rebellion. I mean, he put down a tax revolt. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like
But
you can't live in a state of constant rebellion.
Was that when they pardoned? Which one was it? Where no, that was Jefferson.
Burr.
Jefferson pardoned all the people who were in revolt over.
Yeah,
not
and
being
there's a
paid.
famous and then somebody wrote an amazing short story about it. That's in the next Civil War too. But yeah, I mean, like there is a constant tension between like which you know has kind of made America great. I mean,
That's
I really
intended, though. That's
I am
in
really,
the-
I am really like as the fact that you feel defeated by the First Amendment and the freedom of speech stuff. I mean, to me, like when you come to America, like when you get off the plane at Reagan Airport or anywhere in the United States, the openness with which people talk is, I mean, that is what I love about the United States. Like, and I do love the United States very much, right? Like, it's not my country, it's not my mother, but like, I have a great deal of affection for this country. And the biggest reason for sure is like when you get off the plane, you feel like you can say what you want, which, you know, to be frank, even though, you know, we have the same laws and stuff, like in Toronto, you people whisper. People keep their thoughts to themselves.
There's a guy who went to jail because he wouldn't call his son by the right pronouns.
There is a guy who got fined for telling a joke about a handicapped person and went to the Supreme Court. And
I think I remember that.
And they fined him.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's like if you lose freedom of speech in America, like I think you're losing a huge bit of your secret sauce.
Understand this. One of the most difficult things is getting left perspective individuals, leftists or liberals, to come on these kinds of shows. Cenk Uygur mentioned this last week. One of the biggest mistakes and weaknesses of the left is that they refuse to have these conversations.
Oh, well, everyone's in a silo. Everyone's in these. That's why I go anywhere.
Yeah,
right?
but
like, I mean, everyone is in a silo. Like it's, and I mean,
but we're silo breakers. We intentionally have an eclectic bunch on Timcast IRL every night.
Right.
And one of the points of the culture war is to try and get more people to come on the show. But it is a fact. Left-wing personalities tend not to do opposition media or what they would refer to or anything that could challenge them.
Yeah, it's funny. Like the last time I was on here, I got all these, like, you're platforming Tim Pool. I'm like, I'm not platforming anyone. So like, I'm just going, I'm here. First of all, I'm promoting a book, but I'm also just like, what can be the problem with talking? I don't really get it.
So
like I'm not here. Like, it's not
the
like
problem
it's
with
not you're gonna
talking is
convince.
it's a postmodern problem because if you are allowed to speak,
Yes.
that's where power comes from.
I guess so.
Again, this focuses on this brings us back to, and I'm not trying to drive the conversation to it, but it is a metaphysical philosophy problem.
Let me pull up this video real quick. Right. This is a video where I called the left a cult that can only survive by using cult basic strategies of isolating their
I wonder
victims.
why they don't want to come on your show.
But
I mean, come on, man.
But telling like
you say they're cult based. Why are they going to come on after that?
To disprove
be called that they're part of a cult.
That's not why they don't want to come on.
Right.
They don't want to come on because
in this video, a man interviewing a pro-Palestine activist is approached by facilitators who say only our press liaison can do interviews, and they ask the Palestinian activist not to talk to the press. It is an extremely common tactic. It is the norm at left protests that they will not allow you to talk to anyone. Only their official spokesperson can speak to anyone. Even if you don't know them, you'll show up, they will attack the journalist.
I'll tell you what, man, I know a lot of lefties, and they'll talk to fucking anyone. Like, honest to God.
I mean, here's a video that disproves that notion. I think.
This is one video.
Yes, but this is an example of what happens all the time.
Every political group in the world has a media strategy. Some of the people doing media strategy are the stupidest people on earth.
And the right strategy is anyone talks to anyone, and they beg to come on shows.
They have their own strategies, right? Which are equally stupid.
It is
right. Like
it is tendencies.
I mean, tendencies are. Those are just generalizations. I don't think they're very fruitful at all.
And so we try to bring people on the show who are anyone willing to come on the show. We'll invite them. We invited Cenk Uygur for over a year, he finally agreed to come on the show, and he
Right.
mentioned it is a mistake that the left doesn't come on more
I just
shows.
literally don't understand it.
Why they don't?
Yeah.
But this is my point. The right has no unified fear or strategy around doing media. They beg to do
Are
media.
you joking? Do you know how
The general-
the right has made attacking the media, threatening the
That's
media
not what I'm saying.
a major play?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is
their hatred of the media has become so pronounced.
Yes.
that it has become one of one of their only political winners.
This is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there on the right, there is no fear or unified ideology around whether or not you should or should not do interviews. In fact, Donald Trump keeps doing interviews with media that hates him.
Yeah.
On the left,
well, he understands.
On the left, there is
attention is attention.
on the left, there is a fear that if you do the media, it will shatter your ideas and you will get in trouble with other activists for it. So here's how it works.
Yeah.
We get inundated with emails from people who are post-liberal to conservative begging to come on the show and asking when and how do I get on the show. On the left, they say, how dare you go on Timcast? You're platforming hate.
But let me ask you something. Don't you feel at least somewhat responsible for this state of affairs, given that not to be personal, but like the fusion of journalist and activist, which see, I'm not that. I'm just a guy reporting. I don't really.
That's not true.
But my opinion is not particularly relevant. But
it is.
I mean, I think sometimes I write opinion pieces and sometimes I publish them. But I honestly think my best work, like the things that I'm proudest of and the things that I think actually matter, are things like this, where it's like I got access to the machine and I can tell you how the machine works. If you want to learn, if you want to know how politics works, you can read it. I gave that. That's my gift. And I feel proud of that. Whereas my opinions are just my opinions, right? The fusion of activist and journalist seems to me to be the original sin here. Like, and it is right wing and it is left wing. It is both. And I think it is something that is just destructive in itself.
Agree and disagree. Agree.
Like, I think a journalist should not be a lawyer. They should be a judge.
So I agree. And activist journalism is a huge, huge problem.
Yeah.
So, however, there's a moral question over what is the problem with it. Here at Timcast, we have an eclectic bunch of people of varying different political opinions. We have some employees absolutely hate Israel, some who absolutely love Israel.
Right.
And I'm not going to fire them for having very, very strong disagreements and posting things on the internet.
Did it get physical?
No. Anybody who gets physical, we're not going to employ.
Right,
Like, if you're
sure.
in a fight-
Yeah, of course.
No, but like going on Twitter and saying, Israel this, or like, hey, Palestine this. I'm like, you're allowed to have those opinions.
Yes.
So the issue I take is there are journalists who willfully lie because they're activists.
100%.
So-
and that is truly nonpartisan.
I don't care. So you have political opinions and you have a worldview. You will these are expressed in your thoughts and ideas as it pertains to how you write your books.
No, because when I write books, what I love to do is have my worldview dissolve. That's the best thing. When I write
let's do one.
When I research a piece and when I write a really good piece, what I know is that my original ideas die.
So let's try this. And this may be I may be picking on you, but did a police officer die on January 6th in Washington D.C. at the Capitol?
Well, he had a heart attack and he died, so it would be felony murder.
Who was that?
I forget his name, but he did die
On January 6th.
Yeah.
Because of the riots.
Yeah. Well, there is debate around whether it's because of the riots, but it doesn't matter from a legal point of view because it's felony murder.
Let's try and figure out who this was.
How is it felony murder if he has a heart attack?
If you're committing a crime and a person, like if you rob a bank,
yeah,
and the police guard has their gun up and the guy dies of a heart attack, you are going to jail for murder.
Wait, hold on.
Like it doesn't matter. Like if you're,
he didn't die.
He did die.
He did not die.
Well, that.
At least the report from the Washington Post is that it was a mild heart attack, and in the months since he has talked about it, and he's not dead.
Let me have a look here.
Unless I've got the wrong one.
Well, I don't. Certainly, that is the information.
Well, so here's my point.
Who did they have the memorial for then?
Brian Swetnick.
Who was that?
He was the guy who a few days later suffered a stroke and died.
Oh,
I think it was it? No.
Swetnick is. I'm pretty sure Swetnick was his name. Yeah.
No, I think. Are you sure?
I'm not.
Why are we having this debate over?
No, that's
negligible
Julie
fact?
Swetnick. Who's the? I'll explain in a second, but let me make sure.
These are the 5 people who died in the Capitol riot.
Sicknick.
Sicknick.
Not Swetnick.
Brian
Was Julie
Sicknick, Ashley Babbitt, Kevin Greason.
Sicknick did not die on January 6th. Several days later, he suffered a stroke, and the New York Times reported it was unrelated.
Is bad.
Well, so here's my point. That the writings you have are informed by your worldview and the articles you read, and I have no issue with that whatsoever.
No, but here's the thing. Like, what I try to do when I write, genuinely, this is my life's mission. And I think it's why what I'm proud of as a writer is I go in with assumptions and I investigate and I see what happens and then I watch those assumptions die.
Well,
to me,
and I agree.
To me, when I hear activist journalist, what it means is I'm going to go in with an idea and I'm going to prove it.
Exactly.
And that to me is not how life works. It's not how thinking works. It's not how people should be.
So this is my point.
Like we are all here. We are all in error all the time.
This is my point. You asked me if I feel culpable or
yeah. Well, just because you were sort of you didn't know how it was going to turn out, but you were an early example of it. That's what I mean.
Of activist
journalists.
So I would make the argument that you and I are doing the same thing.
No, we're not.
We absolutely are.
Well, you make a lot more money than me.
Okay, that's different.
I mean, this is a lot better spread than where I'm at.
It's different. My point is when Covington kids, for example, I did not come out and say, look what this kid did. How dare he? Despite the fact that my own subscribers were demanding I denounce him. I said, I need to know what happened first and then talk about it.
Yeah, fair
so I did.
Yeah.
So what we do on this show is typically, they call me a milquetoast fence sitter. That's the meme.
Jeez.
And it's been the meme for a long time because...
If you're that, what the hell am I? My God.
But I would argue you're doing the same thing in a somewhat different way.
See, I feel myself to be completely politically homeless. Right,
well, of course.
Especially right now.
That's what we are here.
Right at this moment, I mean, I don't know where the hell I stand on. I mean, so much. Like there's these structures that I understand about how these things work. But like the actual nature of my political views, I feel I am on unstable ground. Well, so things are giving way all the time.
But this is what we basically do here. And so the first thing is most of the people who watch Timcast IRL are not conservatives.
Right. They're just young.
No. I mean, they're same age as me. They're millennials. I think the average age is like early 30s now because they're aging with us.
Yes, but, that to me is young, but...
Right. But
that's me.
An example, when Steve Bannon came on Timcast IRL for the first time, the majority of our audience had never heard him speak before.
Right.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, never heard her speak before.
Wow, really? Even her?
Even Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Because she's young too, right? She's like 35
Marjorie Taylor Greene?
No, how old is she?
I don't know. How old is she?
We shouldn't just... it's probably
well, but right. my point is...
I think of her as young.
What happens is... we get people on the left, my favorite, Hassan Piker, the most prominent left-wing live streamer, called Ian Crossland a conservative.
Oh, I'm called a conservative all the time.
So we're politically homeless. That's how we describe it.
Yeah, I was called a reactionary the other day.
Right.
Like, it's like...
This is because of how far left the left is.
But it's the same...
now.
But also, I've been called a communist.
Well, sure, absolutely.
Right? I mean,
I've been called a communist.
Yeah, it's just I do feel this, and so in the end, I don't know what to call myself.
Well, because people have called me a communist because I lean left on some things.
Right.
So the goal of what we do here absolutely has a component of activism, but I think it's morally good in that when Kyle Rittenhouse happened, we don't immediately say, what a racist. When George Floyd happens, we don't immediately say, what a racist. When Ahmaud Arbery happens, we don't immediately say, what's a racist. We say, wait, what happened?
Right.
What's the desired outcome? And what are people fighting over? The left, for instance, Cenk Uygur comes on the Culture War show. And when I said, with George Floyd, it's really interesting. And he goes, how dare you defend that racist? I can't believe you do this, Joe. And then he does this impersonation thing where he just mocks him. Oh, I'm so racist. Shutting down conversation, and that's the left.
That's not the left.
He's got the biggest left-wing show in the world.
Listen what we're talking about here. But this is the thing, left-wing show, right? Like we're in this moment where, I genuinely do not know what the left means anymore.
I can tell you.
I do.
See, you guys do because you're not part of it. Right. And similarly, people who know what the right is are the people who aren't part of it.
We aren't.
You go and ask people, how does the right work? people on the left, they know just how it works. Anyone you meet who's in the right, it's all very complicated. And
people on the right,
there has to be nuance for everybody.
There have been
you can't just say something like the left.
There have been a lot of
Meaningless
studies,
at this point.
People on the right and in the center know what the people on the left think, and they understand their arguments. People on the left do not understand people on the right. John Haidt wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, and his
that's exactly what we're talking about.
His analysis of people on the right and the left. The people on the left use only a couple metrics for their opinions, whereas people on the right
care and fairness.
Yeah, care and fairness, and I didn't want to say because I'll probably botch it, but I know that the people on the left use only 2 dimensions, whereas people on the right use all 5 dimensions. 6 dimensions, yeah. and libertarians are kind of off on their own thing. But this is real, and it's testable. It's absolutely real and testable.
Another metric we use is people on the left consume. They get their news from 95% left-wing sources. People in the middle get 60% from the left and 30 to 40 from the right, and people on the right get 60 to 70 from the right and 30 from the left. This is like Pew and Gallup research showing when they poll people and ask them what your sources are, they find that people on the left almost only exclusively go to left-wing activists, media outlets. People in the middle have a mix, and people on the right have a mix.
Listen, the reason I wrote The Next Civil War is because basically of one single theory called complementary radicalization, right? Which is that as politics dissolves, right? Like in Canada, there are left-wing people and right-wing people who have exactly the same policy objectives, and they make them, right? They like enact policies. That's what they do, right? Like, for example, I live in Ontario. I probably will vote Liberal next election. My whole family's in Alberta. They all vote. They will vote Conservative forever. There is we are absolutely fine with each other. Right, like that would not even. It would never be brought up. Like it would not even be considered as a subject of. Maybe a joke, like maybe as a little light joke, but it doesn't really matter. Here, this has become this huge dividing line, and what happens in complementary radicalization is that as the right gets more right, it makes the left go more left, which makes the right go more right, which makes the left go more left, and also as you separate from reality. Right, i.e. government, i.e. what are we going to do with
shared reality
or policy? Like we have politics in order to enact policies for our thing. But as we were saying before, like conservatives have been sending this stream of people to disrupt Washington. Washington doesn't change. Left has been sending to enact all these things. Government doesn't change, right? Like
they link arms in the street, nothing happens.
Nothing happens. You go in, like one thing you can be sure of when you see a rally on the street, it will have no effect. It will have no effect on anything, right?
I disagree a little bit.
Yeah.
I think for the most part it is true, and we have a lot of data showing that DC only cares about the opinions of the ultra wealthy.
Yeah.
However,
literally, it's not even the opinions of the ultra wealthy. It is what money you have.
But I will give one example where the left at least has some in that. Despite the fact that we are seeing people go around tearing down the flyers of the Israeli civilians who are kidnapped, Biden came out and said, we're going to combat Islamophobia.
Right.
And I'm like, wait, hold on. The protests that we're seeing that are defending and advocating for violence are left protests in support of Hamas.
Well, he's saying we're going to defend Islamophobia while we're sending a aircraft carrier to Israel.
Yeah, 2 of them.
Right,
and
2 of
troops.
them.
But what do we see? We see in New York.
Well, do you know the left died this month, right?
Like absolutely. With the Israel stuff.
The left this month is the left is you're going to have to find a whole other subject. Well, that's my point. Like you're actually like the
Amy Schumer
the bugbear
posting
is
campus
gone.
reform.
It's like the left as a unified progressive movements as a unified force essentially ended.
Absolutely.
In October 2023.
2023 was rough because the first kind of volley was June with the way that people reacted to Gay Pride Month and the LGBT stuff.
Bud Light, Target.
Yeah, all that stuff. And then with the additional response by the
cheering
left.
for Hamas.
Well,
I'm not saying every pro-Palestinian cheered for Hamas. I'm saying specifically in New York, there were several rallies where they have been consistently to this day cheering for Hamas.
100%. And you know, left-wing people are not idiots. They look at that and they're like, that's not, is that what we're doing? Is it, because that's not what I'm doing.
Yes, but hold on.
And honestly, like, so what you're seeing
let me just say, Hassan Piker, the biggest left-wing live streamer, to Gen Z and some younger millennials, adamantly criticizes Israel, supports Palestine. That perspective is still dominant and prominent among many on the left, and it's not going to break.
No, I think you're right. But what's happening is that any kind of like, you know, I'll never forget a conversation I had with an FBI agent where we were talking about extremists, and I was like, so, you know, left wing has extremists. Why do they never form themselves into these? Like, you're out there trying to stop these groups that are violently armed on the right. Why does the left never have the same kind of like armed figures?
And he said they do.
He said they destroy themselves before they can get to that point. He said
fair point.
They annihilate they have so little solidarity that they annihilate themselves before they can ever get to the point where they form themselves into actual units.
This is a really good point, because I completely agree.
Yeah,
there are Antifa cells. There are
but they are the most powerless people on earth. They are useless.
But they are chaos.
They're intellectual chaos, and they're the same thing that you find of people who go and shoot up Walmarts.
And so the issue is, if the chaos builds too much, the system destabilizes and breaks.
Well, we're already seeing that. That's what we're talking about.
Right. So I do agree that with something like right-wing militias, they understand hierarchy and authority and solidarity better than the left does. But the left has this bulk low tier in large numbers. Yes,
but it's also, you have to understand that they're institutions, and they've been largely based in institutions. Like, I went to the 2018, like, you know, a lot of these things happen on campuses, and so in humanities departments and campuses are falling apart. Like, if that's your enemy, like,
I don't think that's the issue.
That's like the weakest enemy that you can have.
And that's why I don't think it is. I think big tech is the issue.
Well, and that's for all of us. Yeah, I mean, that's the honest thing we could be united with.
The big danger with the left is the destabilization that the left does, causing the government to react by coming down on the whole populace.
Oh no, but that's everyone. I mean, that, like, you know, that's, you know, you got people firing at the FBI from the right. I mean, like, the chaos that's coming is definitely the fringes of both. This is what happens in other countries, right? So, like, it's not like you can blame people and you can say, like, oh, this one's worse than this one, but the point is, the chaos comes from everyone.
That's what happened not to bring up, you know, I hate to bring up Hitler, but the whole reason we've
lost. We all gotta go.
But the reason that
we're live streaming conversations about Hitler.
I'm not talking about him, but I'm talking about the Weimar Republic. The fighting between the left and the right in the streets is why the people called for a strong government to stop the fighting. So we're not talking about Hitler himself. I'm talking about the people beforehand.
Weimar's close enough. I gotta go.
Come on now.
I gotta go.
The shot heard, in my opinion, the shot heard around the world for the next civil war, should it happen, will likely come from the right and not the left.
Oh, yeah. Well, the odds of that are like 50-4.
And it's not because I am saying that there's a far fringe right-wing extremist who's going to go to a racist act. No. The left is a destabilizing force. I call them chaos. I call them fire. But the right, what I fear is, I mentioned the border. The shot heard around the world is not going to be a bunch of people pulling up some new flag of, you know, a new American flag or whatever and screaming revolution. It's going to be 14 guys in a militia saying the federal government is in defiance of state law and federal law, and we're going to go set up our own checkpoint on this road. The federal government will pull up and be like, we're the authority here, and they're going to say, you guys are in violation of the law.
That's chapter 1 of the next civil war.
Exactly. It is not the left that's going to do this. The left is going to do stupid things like throwing firebombs and acting like wild
property
chaos.
Crime.
Low-level violence.
Low-level property crime.
Widespread.
Property crime.
But
they're much more likely to do that.
This is why I said watching the federal government raise the razor wire to allow lawbreakers to break the law was terrifying to me, because that is the catalyst for a group, a vigilante. I can't even call it vigilante because they're effectively operating on the side of the law. But more importantly, you have the risk of state versus federal violence. If Texas says enough, they are in violation of state and federal law, the National Guard will go in and stop the CBP from breaking the law. Now you've got government versus government.
No, that to me is highly unlikely. I mean, I looked at that scenario. I talked it over with the colonel who drew up. Like, that's,
I don't know.
That would just be no, because first of all, one of the more interesting things that the U.S. military did was like in every other country, it tends to work by these battalions that are formed in local communities. And that's like, you know, in Alberta, like when you get the soldiers for the Canadian military, they come from the same towns and the same farm towns, and they fight. U.S. after the Civil War, the U.S. was like,
nope,
we're not doing that.
Because what happens is...
Yeah, because then it's like suddenly you got someone in the military who's from Georgia, and like, do they owe their loyalty to Georgia or to the U.S.?
So this was literally the Civil War.
Yeah.
You had all these West Point graduates.
And they left.
And a great question by, was it Stonewall Jackson maybe? He was Virginia, right?
Yeah.
He wrote something about his loyalty to the United States, but the questions of his loyalty to his home, to his neighbors, and his community.
Well, that was Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee had that famous comment where because he was the star of West Point. He was like the
and then he was
the
like,
shining light, and he was like, "Oh, I'm a Virginia first.
My family."
Yeah.
So my fear
and that was like, you know, the thing that was very interesting about that is like the United States was plural before the Civil War.
That's right. The famous line from National Treasure.
Oh, is that in there? Yeah.
Nicolas Cage says, before the Civil War, it was the United States are.
Yeah.
And afterwards, it was the United States is.
That's right. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. That's, and so that's like, but the military really reflects that, right? So that particular conflict that particular scenario is not likely. However, if a county sheriff does such a thing, and they easily could.
Well,
then you really could have. I mean, that's what the U.S. military has actively planned for.
My fear is the circumstance that we're witnessing. I mean, look, it's not the first one. You've got videos of CBP snipping the razor wire.
Yeah, this has been happening for years.
But
California did the same thing too.
The issue is there is only one answer. Either we do not uphold the law and the law no longer exists.
Yeah.
Or the law is upheld, and the federal government, what needs to happen is, if you are going to take the lawful good approach of, we abide by the rules of this nation, we are a nation of laws, the sheriff must arrest the CBP who are cutting the barbed wire.
Then you have a real, well, see, that would be the sheriffs, the constitutional sheriffs have their own point of view on this legally. The federal government has an entirely different point of view. That's exactly right. But I would also say that anyone who wants to go up against the U.S. military in any capacity, you're going to lose.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
Name a war the United States military has won in the past.
Oh, they won them all. Like, have you ever read that? Have you ever read that?
Wait.
You're talking about two different people.
Well, no. It's easy to win
it.
Like, have you ever read the book Why We Lost by
Afghanistan,
about Afghanistan,
Iraq,
it's about Afghanistan,
Vietnam, Korea.
Like
you're conflating.
You
two
literally
things.
read this book and you're like, why? When does the losing start? Like they win every single battle.
That's because you're conflating
Vietnam.
two things. You're conflating that you're conflating military capability with political ends.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the U.S. military doesn't lose engagements.
Yeah,
they win every engagement.
Exactly.
It's the policymakers that fail in the policy. They fail in what policy is attainable. They fail in deciding what we should use the military for. But the military doesn't lose.
No. You're right. They win engagements.
Yeah.
But Afghanistan is a really great example of we lost.
Oh, well, I remember one of the great stories a journalist told me about Afghanistan is he was like in Afghanistan, he was embedded with the Taliban. This was when they were fighting the Soviets. And he saw that one of the Taliban fighters was fighting with a flintlock rifle that had been taken from the British from 1878. And it had 1878 written on it. And he was like, whoever goes up against these guys is going to lose. Like, it doesn't make, like if you're fighting with a flintlock rifle, you're not going to lose.
You're going to kill that guy, but his kid's going to pick it up.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, like,
the point.
but that is the point of the next civil war, right? So, it's like you can control when they created the political space in Iraq for elections in the surge, the violence that they had to commit to do that was so great that it made politics irrelevant. And that's exactly what could happen in the United States, right? Like they would win against the sheriff. They would I mean, it would not be a contest. It would be like an NBA team playing against the YMCA pickup team. But like, it doesn't matter how much you win, you're still going to lose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they'll win the engagement. If a local sheriff comes out and goes to CBP and says, put your hands behind your back, you're under arrest, they're going to say no.
And would you want to be up against Americans?
If I was the sheriff,
do you know what I mean?
If I was the sheriff in the county where Eagle Pass resides, Right now, day one, when I saw a video of them slipping barbed wire, I would instruct my deputies to arrest any of them on site immediately.
But
and I
you would
tell,
be charged with treason.
that's not treason. Treason is
it would
aiding
be
and abetting.
according to the federal government.
No, it wouldn't. Treason is providing aid or materials to enemies at war.
A sheriff only
Sedition.
has a sheriff but one of the things that they have specifically is piracy. Right. So like that involves anything with water. I just happen to know this technically because I spent so long with it. Like if the federal government would just argue, well, you're interfering with our right to navigate piracy.
That's not treason. That'd be sedition.
Well, okay, fair enough. It would be
treason is abetting an enemy at a time of war.
That's right. Yeah, but it would you would just be charged with sedition. But like they don't have a like there's other cases that they may, like, you know, the federal government, the constitutional sheriff charges there's only 5 things for the federal government to do. One of them is counterfeiting, one of them is piracy. I forget what I think one of them is kidnapping. But and then there's a couple others that I forget. For the
you know what I would do? I would arrest them for destruction of state property.
Well, you could try, but I mean, you wouldn't get anywhere.
I absolutely would. Don't care.
I mean, you would not.
All that
have
is
legal
required
right
for evil to
stand
triumph
on.
is for good men to do nothing.
I mean, come on. Like, this kind of moral clarity is so blinding. We're in real situations here.
And the real situation
is we're trying to deal with complicated,
and I understand that.
overlapping bureaucracies.
And when you have the law and someone breaking the law, if you decide I will not uphold it, you may as well not have it.
Do you really believe that the loyalty to a county is going to be greater than the loyalty to federal authority?
What does that mean?
Well, because in this position, you're taking the role of the sheriff.
Federal law says these people are illegal entering the country as well.
Yes, but that's not, the federal government's doing it. So, then your redress would be with the federal government rather than
if a cop walks
somebody
into a bank and points a gun at the teller and says, give me everything, we don't go, the government's doing it. We say this person's committing a crime.
Well, not if they've been ordered to do that by the government.
Doesn't matter.
It's still a crime.
It's still a crime.
The government
if the federal government decides has all kinds of control over banks. All kinds of controls over banks. Like, they don't go in with a gun. They just, they have all kinds of ways of manipulating
regulation
banks.
is different, and we can argue
that
it's bad.
What you're essentially saying is if the federal government makes a regulatory pull of a bank, controls over a bank,
that's not what I said.
Then it is essentially committing a crime, and we should shoot
straw man
people
argument.
who do it.
Well, that was an insane straw man. An insane straw man.
You're the one who brought up a cop walks into a bank. So cops walk into banks all the time.
There is a big difference between a mandate from law for a cop to seize an asset under writ of a judge and a cop deciding to point a gun at a teller and demand money.
Nobody went and pulled up that thing without a mandate. That's my point. So, like, the point is, the actual source of this is this mandate.
And so let's try again.
Okay, let's try again.
A chief of police tells his officers.
Try it again without morality. Try it again like you're a Roman trying to come up with a better system.
A police chief tells 2 of his guys in his office, go point guns at tellers and take money from the vault. And they go, you got it, boss. What do we do?
I'm sorry, but like, if the
Answer
way
the
that
question.
What is this example? Let me rephrase it, okay? A bank is in violation of their capital control amounts.
We're not. Texas is not in violation of the law by doing what they're doing.
No, well, that's the federal government's opinion. Let's say the bank is actually, and the federal government is wrong and still does.
A judge has to sign off on it.
Yeah, well,
judge did not sign off on what we're seeing CBP do.
Look, you're bringing up this example that I don't know very well, but like, my point is that the federal government interferes with other institutions, like literally every minute of every day. Right, like the fact that it's and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong.
Lines.
Sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, and there are lines, but actually there aren't a lot of lines.
And the answer is not to witness crimes being committed to say, well, there's lines.
No, the answer is to go to court and talk about it like reasonable human beings, like and figure it out with lawyers. Like, that's why they're there. Like, I don't think the answer is let's criminalize. Everyone who's trying to impose federal authority. And sometimes
they're violating federal authority. The answer is
there's lots of cases where there's federal overreach. Of course there are. And the way to deal with it is like actually having a conversation in court.
And so first, what would happen is local law enforcement would approach CBP and say, you are hereby ordered to halt pending review from a judge. Have a nice day.
Right.
The law of our state says no, federal law says no, and you will need to come back with approval from a judge. Instead, they're going and snipping. It is insane
Look,
to me.
I mean, I don't know the specifics of this case, so I probably shouldn't talk about. I mean, you could be right. But the point here is that there is always going to be a tension between different levels of authority.
Absolutely.
Right. That happens in Switzerland with the cantons and the federal government. It happens the problem is it happens in Iceland with the local municipalities and the larger federal authority. It sure as hell happens in Canada. I mean, we're in the middle of all this struggle between the provinces and the federal government. I mean, it's getting incredibly ugly. But the problem here is not that tension, is my point. That tension is part of the natural order of a political system. The problem is when the only way that you can respond to that tension is by conjuring fantasies of violence.
Who's talking about violence?
We're talking about like arresting people, throwing them in jail when they're coming from the federal government.
You think an arrest is violence?
Have you ever been arrested?
Yes.
Wait, I mean,
it was not
no.
violent.
Well, it's not pleasant either.
But it's not violence. I put my hands behind my back. I was placed in a car. I sat in a room for 12 hours. They let me out, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, just 12 hours. When was that? Occupy Wall Street?
No. I never got arrested for that. I was arrested for skateboarding.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The only time you've been arrested is for skateboarding?
I was arrested for driving on a suspended license, but that was an I-bond.
Oh, right.
So that was
That's funny. They don't often arrest for that.
And it was an illegal stop too. But he takes me out of the car. He says, "Your license is suspended." I said, "I had no idea." And he goes, "Doesn't matter. Sign this. Have someone come pick you up. You've been arrested and released."
That's upsetting.
And I mean, yeah, it's.
Oh, but you didn't go to jail then. They just
Right.
said, made you sign. Right. Oh, okay. Got
But you are arrested. You are processed on the spot,
Right.
and then they tell you to go home. But I did go to jail overnight for skateboarding once, and the judge was so pissed.
Right. I bet. Yeah.
But it wasn't violent. They set me
Yeah.
down, and they said, "You're being arrested." They said it was a felony. And then
They said it was a felony for skateboarding?
Yup.
Yeah.
Riding my board on the sidewalk, downtown Chicago, but the sidewalk was property controlled by the federal government. So they said it was
Right.
criminal damage to federal property.
Right.
The judge was livid, and he was basically like, "How dare you waste my time?
Yeah, of course.
Get out of my courtroom." But it wasn't violent.
Imagine if you'd had an idiot judge, your whole life could have changed.
Yep. They wanted to make an example of people. It was 3 a.m.
Wouldn't have been able to travel.
Oh yeah, of course.
Wouldn't have been like
life over.
Life over.
But the judge was, good judge. And but my point is, ceasing someone from committing an illegal act.
Okay, I'm just saying here, the problem here is that these debates have gotten so ferocious and so moralistic and so about fundamental principles.
I'll tell you why.
Because they're so removed that what the actual business of governing, which is Texas disagrees with the federal government. They take their steps taken. Things happen. You need to talk it over. That gets removed, and instead it's like, let's arrest people and
I'll tell you why.
Let's play out these dramatic scenarios.
No.
And
I'll tell you why.
I just think it's not very fruitful.
And I'll tell you why. Right now, you have almost every state in agreement. The southern border is a crisis.
Yeah.
Eric Adams, New York City, several other governors are petitioning the federal government to do something about it, not just border states.
Yeah.
The simple answer right now is if the plurality, nay, the majority of governance of this nation says stop, and the federal government goes, we're going to keep breaking the law anyway.
Well, the federal government's actually been.
At some point, you need to say, guys,
it's really funny because we have this very pro-immigration policy, but no one illegal immigrants would absolutely not be accepted by anyone in Canada. Right, it's a very rule-abiding place, and the idea that there's tens of millions of people illegally just seems insane to me. But
it's America.
I understand that there are different reasons for it too, and I understand that there's historical context, and I understand that there's crises.
So here's my point.
And there's humanitarian reasons as well, and surely this has got to be something that people This is one of those things where it's like, surely everyone's on the same page. There's
yes.
obvious answers
except
to this.
The federal.
No. I think the federal government is on the same. They want both the solution and also
my point is this:
restriction. Right.
If the states overtly, willfully are subverting the law. If the federal government is violating the rights of states, and there is no fair adjudication, you get system collapse.
Yeah, to me, the more critical problem, Because illegal immigration is one of those problems that's like.
I'm not talking, but let's remove ourselves from this.
But I don't think you quite realize what that's the right problem to have. Right, because like people like it's a huge boost for your car. But anyway, like
no,
the
hold
abortion
on.
question to me is actually much more legally problematic.
I'll give you an example. What's happening in Texas is a granular component of what's causing civil war, and I'll explain. California, in the past census, had an extra congressional seat, perhaps 2.
Yeah.
Because California violates federal law by allowing non-citizens into the country, who are then counted in the census, and congressional seats and electoral votes are apportioned based on this. This means
they don't have the same thing in Texas.
So all states do the census based on total people count, not citizen count.
Yeah.
So but
Texas must have the same thing
with non-citizens.
Yeah.
The issue being Texas is resisting. So here's the point.
But they're still counting those people.
Yes. And so the issue is not whether or not they're counted. It's the willful act of manipulating our electoral college and our Congress through intentionally violating federal law. If Texas says, please help us get these people out of this country, we don't want them to be counted in the census. And the Republicans under Trump said the citizenship question should be on the census. The Democrat state said no. The Supreme Court said no. And so what happens is California has a disproportionate amount of electoral power in federal government based on violating federal law intentionally.
Tim, you put me in such a weird position because when you say these things, it makes me want to argue the other side. And I'm not arguing for them. The point is this. Listen, my point is like what I could say here at this point. It doesn't matter. What I could say at this point is like, well, if you look at Republican gerrymandering and all these things, it's like it's all obvious. But my point is,
I'm not making a moral point.
Why are we like we all know that we both know. You and I both know that this system is collapsing.
Absolutely. And my point is
the reason is for a lot of reasons on both left and right. And we also both know that.
Okay, let me make my point. The point is, the reason why I called you an activist before is that
I'm not an activist.
But you are arguing that point. I make
arguments, but also
I am not arguing that Texas is correct or California is correct. I'm arguing that this is a thing that is happening, and the red states will not tolerate subversion and this is why we got Texas v. Pennsylvania. You can argue and say California has a right to let people in. Don't care. You can argue Texas has a right to get rid of them. Don't care. I agree with you. Texas benefits, same as California.
You don't think there's more sedition on the right than on the left?
I don't know what that means.
I mean, the disrespect for federal government as a core belief.
You see, this is why I say you're an activist.
No. That's not activism. No.
How do you quantify whether there's more or less?
Number of court cases.
That doesn't mean anything. That could simply mean there's more institutional power for one faction.
January 6th.
What about May 20th? May 29th?
What's May 29th?
Exactly.
Buddy,
if you don't know and you're using
the left is full of people that want a revolution.
But this is not even the point.
Call for revolution.
Yes,
my point is
they're just so powerless that you never hear from them. They're like the.
So now hold on. Are you talking
like the most powerless?
Now you move the goalpost. Are you talking about the power that they have, or are you talking about which side has more, or whatever? Because there are plenty of people on the left, and I'm not saying there aren't people on the right, but there are plenty of people on the left who call for revolution, who say they don't want Joe Biden, they want revenge, all sorts of any number of revolutionary
substantially
discussions.
More people rioted on May 29th than on January 6th.
Listen, what you're talking about, which riots?
The May 29th insurrection.
Which
when they firebombed the White House, the president was forced into an emergency bunker.
Which? Oh, you mean yes? Okay, I see what you mean.
St. John's Church set on fire.
St. John's Church. Yeah.
Where are the court cases from that? Where's the Inquisition?
All I would say is that I spent a couple of years talking to the most dispassionate experts that I could find in. I would concede elite institutions of
if you're talking to elite institutions, you're getting one perspective.
The FBI as well.
You're still getting one perspective.
Well, I also visited, I also spent a lot of time with Oath Keepers and with people, and I certainly got along with them great.
Antifa? Far leftists?
I did meet some Antifa, but they're pretty boring. And the thing about Antifa is they don't want to talk to people like me.
That's right.
Like they don't want to they're super. I mean, I did manage to interview some of them, but they're not they're like.
So my point is this.
Listen,
when I ask you,
I think if you're honestly telling people that there's not a taste for sedition on the right, you know that's not
I didn't say that.
No, we're
That's
saying
not what I
it's,
said.
that it's not one side or the other. This is something that you've been saying the whole time, that it's not one side or the other. The idea that it's only on the right, it may be more.
This is what I was just saying. It's like you bring up these things from the left, and it's like that makes me say, well, the other thing is happening on the right, but I don't want to be. That's not.
And we don't. When you said
you're
you asked
turning me
me
into an activist by forcing me to mirror your half.
Why don't you have agency? What are you talking about?
No. Well,
you're wrong about.
I'm taking agency right now by saying, like, I don't like this process.
Though it's a single example. The reason I asked about the officer on January 6th is to make the point that you are coming from a left liberal perspective as you approach this, and you think you're not. I did not assert that there's more or less sedition on the right or the left. You did.
What you don't understand is that I'm actually not on your spectrum. I'm from another country.
I know that.
With a completely different spectrum.
Absolutely.
So on that spectrum, I would definitely not probably at any point in my life have been considered left. Right. And also
by American standards.
But American standards, you're in the middle of collapse,
and I'm making an example.
You're in the middle of intellectual and political decay.
And so my point is,
I would also say, like, what I feel as a human being is politically homeless. So when you say I belong to someone, I kind of wish I did.
Okay, my point is this.
But I actually don't.
If you are wrong about your single fact on January 6th. I know we don't have the opportunity to go through everything you may be wrong about, but
we'll wait for that. That'll be the long show.
My point is
everything that Stephen Marche is wrong about.
You said you made the statement that you implied there's more sedition on the right than the left.
Well, I would say this.
What's your metric for this?
Well, the FBI officers I talk to who are worried about and the military,
now I'll respond.
The military people who plan for full spectrum operations in the homeland, they're only worried about right wing groups.
And now I'll respond.
Yeah.
On May 29th, when thousands across tens of thousands, we saw police stations burned down. We saw 90 plus days of firebombing of federal buildings. And we saw the White House actually get firebombed, and the church in front of it across the street, St. John's, was set on fire.
Yeah.
Where are the court cases over that? Now, I'm not saying either still that the left or the right has more. My point is, I do not find your metric to be absolute or enough. My position is, I don't know if there's more or less on either side. You believe you do know, but you've not asked.
Well, it's not that I believe that I know. It's that I believe that the most impartial, best voices that I could speak to and the best investigations that I could come up with were unequivocal.
But you're going to one source.
Oh, not one source. There's two. I mean, in Next Civil War, I interviewed 200 people.
I know. I'm not saying.
Right. I mean, I interviewed farmers about corn prices. I mean, I was
and
going
you didn't
deep.
Interview the far left because they didn't want to talk to you.
I did interview some of them. But they're
but clearly.
But they're not. They're also. Well, actually, there was a huge section about the tearing down of a statue at University of Virginia. I forget which one it is.
Why was there no federal hearing on the 529 insurrection?
Well, I don't think it was considered a serious threat to the federal government.
The president was forced into an emergency bunker for the first time in several generations.
Yes, but it wasn't an actual threat to the overthrow of the government. Right, like no one was worried.
The life of the president was in jeopardy. They forced him into
the life of the president in the United States is always in jeopardy.
They forced him into an emergency bunker, and you think that doesn't matter?
Do you believe that there was any out on
Well, see, I talked to a Secret Service agent
on January 6th. Do you believe that there was ever a possibility of any outcome other than Joe Biden becoming the president? Because
100%.
I don't think.
100%.
You believe that it was possible?
Oh, I don't think there's. Look,
I think the idea that of it actually happening, no matter what the people on the ground thought, I think the idea of it actually happening, where Donald Trump was able to remain in office, is as fantastical as dragons.
You actually said this that Mike Pence kicking back votes wouldn't have mattered because this.
No. Well, also, some left-wing people have been upset at me because I don't refer to it as an insurrection. I think it was a riot. Like I don't think it met the criteria that I apply were from PRIO, which is the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, which, you know, they have the studies of civil war, right? And like for them, an insurrection is very different than what happened on January 6th.
Then I will clarify.
Yeah.
The reason why I refer to 529 as an insurrection is a political point, not a literal statement.
Well, my point is that
was a riot.
Assassinating presidents is something that your country does on the regular. Right, I mean, a Secret Service.
Our presidents or their presidents?
Well, both. But you know, a Secret Service agent told me it's part of the political process, right? Assassinating presidents.
You know how many presidents have been assassinated?
4 out of 45.
Okay, 10%.
It's 1 out of 11, dude.
Yeah,
like there's been one
fair point.
one British prime minister in 1811 was assassinated. That's it, right? Like Australia had one. Canada's never happened.
Yeah, but they cut kings' heads off, didn't they?
In the 17th century, but that's after a long legal debate. There's never been like assassination is. So my point is that the threat to the president, I mean, you have to pay $2 million a day to keep the president alive.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's what the going rate is to keep the president alive.
The point is, what's a bigger threat? A riot at the Capitol or people firebombing the home of the president and forcing him into an emergency bunker?
Oh, well, definitely the Capitol. No, I mean, the death of a single president your country wouldn't miss a beat. I mean, you guys have been here before.
We didn't miss a beat from January 6th.
Yeah. Oh, you missed a bunch of beats.
We didn't. They came back later that day and finished.
Same day the process was finished.
But the sense of vulnerability of the political system as a whole, I mean, was absolutely
you're an
transformed.
activist,
I'm not an activist. That is a point that I think has been expressed by many people across the political spectrum. You know what?
For a political end.
Listen, I just have my opinion, right? Like, if you want to, and that is my opinion. But I would also say that I don't think it fits neatly into a political category. It certainly doesn't fit into, the left-wing books that were written about this subject. Like neither did Barbara's book about how civil wars start. Right? It fit into a political science metric. Are you doing
I'm playing with the Texas.
With skateboarding? You can't really. You
I'm
can't
not really doing.
You could get arrested for that. I hear.
That's true.
But
my point is simply this:
Yeah.
I do not believe it is easy enough or possible to quantify the greater threat of May 29th or January 6th.
I mean, I think it has been quantified, and the people that I've seen who have quantified it would be of one opinion.
And that is the bias.
Well, I guess here's the thing. A fact is what. Oh yeah, I want to try this. A fact is, an opinion that we've agreed to stop fighting about. And I think part of the major problem in the United States is that there are no facts. There's nothing that people have stopped agreeing about. Right? There's nothing that people have stopped fighting about. And they keep coming up with new ones to fight about.
I care about this. Ahmaud Arbery, that case.
Yeah.
The left reports it as a man was jogging down the street and 2 white men lynched him. My immediate question is, okay, give me the facts of the case. Let's break this down, figure out what happened and how we prevent it.
Yeah.
You then discover that story is not true. It's something totally different.
That's why we have courts.
And whether or not, and the court even agrees with my view on this, the question of why the McMichaels went to jail was actually whether they had the right to engage in a citizen's arrest, not that they were lynching a jogger. The left maintains the false narrative. I'm not here to drag the left for this. My point is simply this. When it comes to how we approach a story, is what can we answer as fact, which is simple. Is 2 + 2 4? The answer is yes. That's what I'm looking for. As to your moral question on what we should have done or what happens is immaterial to me for the most part. I have my moral opinions. You have yours. You're allowed to have them.
Oh, I think you have a very distinct morality.
Absolutely. Now,
now
the issue of January 6th and 529 to assert as fact that something is or is in these regards, I think is an impossible question. We don't have a simple
No, it's not.
It absolutely is.
Many people have answered it.
People's opinions don't
people
matter.
do not
Consensus is not science.
Well, that's
2 + 2 is 4. That's easy.
That's just consensus.
And people argue.
Have you read Dostoevsky? He said it's the right of every human to say 2 + 2 is 5.
And that's
why
fine,
we gamble.
But it doesn't change the fact that 2 + 2 is 4. There will never be an instance where you take 2 apples, push them up against 2 apples, and 5 apples appear. An extra apple just manifests. It's not going to happen. There are simple arguments about the nuances of decimal systems and fractions, and I'm not talking about that. When it comes to the issue of May 29th versus January 6th. We have fact-based questions to ask and then ask ourselves why we believe one was worse than the other. These are impossible questions because they're based on subjective morality. So therefore, I would say January 6th is bad. 529 was bad. I don't know how you quantify one being worse than the other.
You have just expressed the postmodern view of news up to an absolute perfect. You are a postmodern human being.
Yeah,
even with the skateboard.
Absolutely.
Like that is
and they call me communist. Heavens.
They call you a communist with the notebook. This is it. This is the picture. Postmodern man. There he is. The guitar behind.
What do you think of thinking that 2 + 2 could equal 5?
Well, that's Dostoevsky.
That doesn't matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter who said it, because it is still postmodern. To say that 2 + 2 equals 5 is postmodern.
I think he meant that. I mean, his claim
people
was
are allowed to be wrong and argue for themselves.
Yeah, people
That's
are.
fair.
Your soul matters more than the world.
That's fair, but there is currently an argument that goes on online and Twitter, postmodernists, and it has filtered into the hard sciences, which is part of why it's a significant problem. But there are people that will try to assert that no, 2 + 2 can equal 5, and then they'll go ahead and they'll talk about different types of math that I can never
we got the flat
articulate.
earthers, right? I mean, we've got a lot of things going on.
But the point that I'm making is the idea that 2 + 2 can equal 5 is a postmodern idea, because what you have to do is change the meanings of the words.
Look, dude,
Right.
I'm just a journalist. I'm out here trying to figure out what the hell happened. And like whether 2 + 2 is 5, like that's, I mean, I can quote Dostoevsky, but like that's above my pay grade.
But
I'm just trying to make sense of things.
I do agree with a lot of what the postmodernists argue about news, politics, and truth and power. They certainly understand that to a great degree.
Did you read it when you were a kid? Like, did you read Baudrillard and people like that when you were a kid?
No, I did not.
Did you read any of it? Did you read like...
Only read the internet. So the
only read the internet.
So the answer is actually fractionally yes. I've read...
Right.
So I would read like a chapter...
You read Zizek though, I bet, at some point.
No.
Really? Oh, interesting.
So mostly my upbringing is articles online. And so that means sometimes I would read 1 page or 2 from like the Gulag Archipelago or something.
You would love the postmodern condition. You should read the postmodern condition and come back and we'll talk. I'll come back and we'll talk about it.
So there are some...
By Leotard, amazing book. I think you would be, this stuff about numeracy, like numbers and that, like that's his argument. It's like there's numbers and then there's opinion and that's it.
So here's what I see happening. The general concept surrounding something like 2 + 2 equals 5 at a high level.
How did we get on this subject? I love it. Don't get me wrong.
Postmodernist philosophy.
Yeah.
There is a core truth to the understanding of subjectivity, objectivity, and numbers and nuance. The problem is people who aren't smart enough to actually have the conversation start saying stupid things like 2 + 2 equals 5.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of those things like the democratization of knowledge.
Yeah.
Like it sounds great in theory,
and then really dumb people.
And then you like actually see what it looks like, and you're like, oh, this is just all idiocy.
Right.
So, I mean, this is what happened in the I did my PhD on 17th century drama and stuff like that. And this would happen with pamphlets, right? When pamphlets spread everywhere, there was absolute chaos. It was exactly like the period we're in.
Right, I love it.
Civil War, this English Civil War, 1640. I mean, that's pamphlet culture, right?
It's a fracturing of the unified worldview.
And suddenly you've got 100 religions, right? You had one, and all these 100 religions want to kill each other, right? And then you know what solved it is they formed a Royal Society. And the Royal Society was like, we're just going to do reliable information, and we're not going to ask what your religion is. We're not going to ask what you believe about God. We're just going to say, like, how do you think a cell works? And if you publish a paper, we'll look at it and tell you if it's bullshit or not. And like, honestly, that's what we need. We need like a Royal Society.
I'll do one final thought, and then I'll give you the final word. But here's
Canada, man. What am I supposed to do?
Here's a big challenge. My final thought, and then I'll throw it to you. Big challenge. So your I think we agree like 90+% on like your past.
Yeah, so it's funny. We get into these fights, but we actually are mostly in agreement.
Mostly in agreement.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
So, but what ends up happening is, I believe you're an expert
right
on a lot of these subjects.
Yes,
and
I am.
Even when I disagree with some of them, you have done way more work than the average person.
Yeah.
And what happens now, because of the democratization of knowledge, let's say your book has 95% correct.
Oh my God, you're so right. I know just what you're going to say.
Someone's going to look at the book and go, but I know this one element is wrong.
Or they only take the 5% that they know is right. Yeah. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's like I take this and the rest of it they ignore. Right.
Exactly.
Like, and they just cherry pick. That's the thing. You cherry pick data And then of course you can make any argument you want.
And they'll say, this guy, Stephen Marche, yeah, he wrote that book, but he thought this about this one thing.
So he's an idiot.
I literally wrote a lyric in one of the songs that you heard the other day, brand new, and it actually points to exactly what we're talking about. One thing wrong, and then you can disregard everything that they say because it allows people to go ahead and say, oh, he's just a liar. He's not telling the truth because I found the one flaw, and that gives them the validation to dismiss everything that a person says.
And
it happens all the time.
The reason why I'm ending on this is to make the point. I have pulled out single subjects and asked you about them, but I want to stress, I think you're mostly right.
Right. Yeah, well, I think I dislike the way that you describe huge groups of people in generalized terms like left and right. I don't find it useful anymore. Honestly, we're in such chaos now. I mean, when you go and meet people on the right, like that is such a broad...
But you're doing it too.
But see, people who...
How else do you do it?
I guess that's really it.
No, man.
Like how else do you do it? But like they're so varied.
Absolutely.
Like their opinions are like and their spirit is so varied.
I met a guy at a Best Buy once, and he was like, "I'm a huge fan," and I was like, "Oh, nice to meet you." And then he started talking about flat Earth. He started talking about
right,
and I'm like, I don't understand how you watch my show. I don't
come to all that.
He was like, yeah. I think on March Trump's going to be the president again, and I was like, did you watch my show? Because I've been saying no to all of that. But,
yeah.
Hey man,
but it's more. They're
there
for the vibe or whatever.
Yeah,
and that's how it. And I mean, to begin with, the way we talked, like about how like left people don't come on right shows, and like this is a problem.
It is.
It's like a legitimate problem.
I think
it's like, and the right not going like
the right goes on the left.
Like
when they're allowed on, because the left says you're platforming.
Yeah,
but
like the platforming thing is absolutely infuriating.
DeSantis, Vivek,
I just
Trump,
like, who do you think you are? Like it's like this is not like you're just a person with an opinion. Like, and when it comes down to it, just like everybody else,
it is.
In this
it
world.
Really is the. I really do think that the philosophy comments or whatever is what it really boils down to. If you believe that words are where power lives, then you don't want to have people saying things that conflict with your perspective or that would empower opinions you don't like.
We'll wind it down. So if you want to throw any final thoughts.
Oh, just buy my book, Last Election. It is actually very good. It's you got
to leave me a copy so I can read it.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew definitely, he explained how politics works. And if you actually want to know the mechanics and like how the watch works, this is probably the best description you're going to get.
I want to do a review of it.
It's available on Audible. I just downloaded it.
I want to read it, and then I want to give like my take on the variables within it.
There's sort of a character like you in it.
But my idea is like I want to read your perspective on like what could happen, and then what I want to do is like look for inflection points where I can talk about. He mentions the military here. I'm wondering if this could happen or what would happen if this happened. So
I think you'll find
Andy Pons the character's name.
Yeah, I think
Andy Pons.
I think you'll find it. A lot of the things you talk about reflected in very specific ways.
Yeah,
like that was true with the next Civil War too.
Yeah,
right. Like I think like a lot of the stuff you were talking about was in there as well, just in a kind of more, I guess, formulaic way, like a more like systematic way. But it's the same stuff you've been talking about.
Yeah. Well, that's why we wanted to have you on, especially now. Too,
it's always fun to be here.
With this book as well. But thanks for hanging out, man. We went a little bit long, but it was really good.
Yeah, I can't believe it just zipped by.
I know, all right? And we were talking over, arguing and yelling is great.
Yeah.
You want to say anything before we wrap up, Phil?
I'm Phil Labonte, lead singer of All That Remains. You can find me on Twix at Phil That Remains, on Instagram, Phil That Remains Official. The band is All That Remains. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, Amazon Music, the internet.
I'm going to say it now, but I'm not totally sure, but I believe the next episode of this show will be appearing on Tenet Media, where it will find its new home. Clips of the show will remain on this channel, though. And we're going to be expanding what we do with this channel with other stuff. You may have noticed the Lauren Southern documentary that we've posted the trailers for on this channel and some clips of. So there's a lot of big stuff happening. Super excited for what Tenet is working on. There's a bunch of really cool people involved. And then we'll just post the link and we'll keep you informed as to where it's going to be. I'll tweet it out and all that stuff. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.